Ahead. Yes, ready to go.
Welcome, everybody, to session number 3 of 6 of this year's Responsible Raw Materials Conference. This year, it is all about creating change, or actually, no, scrap that. It's all about creating certainty in a changing world. See, I've got it on the brain, Aileen, absolutely. And we called the conference that intentionally because it sparks so much emotion in people. Lots of people saying, no, you shouldn't be striving for certainty. It should all be about predictability or stability, or maybe we like the uncertainty and all of the madness that is going on right now, but because perhaps that opens some opportunity for us with regards to ways in which we might be able to make the situation better for ourselves. So we've had a fantastic set of talks already. So yesterday we had session number 1. This morning we had session number 2, and this afternoon is session number 3 of 6. Now, if you want to catch up on any of the sessions that we have been going through over the last couple of days, don't worry, everything has been recorded. It's all streamed live to YouTube. And the way you catch up with it is by going into the Responsible Raw Materials website, go to this year's conference, which happily also has, if you scroll down to the bottom of the screen, it's got the agenda that we're working our way through at the moment. So this is session 1. This was yesterday, and we had a whole variety of fantastic sessions. We started off with 4 really exciting students from the University of Oxford sharing their perspectives. And we heard from a wide range of individuals, all from all around the world, including, for example, Isabel Bale from M&C Saatchi. She gave what I think can only be described as a truly terrifying presentation about what is really going on in the world of content and what are people really trying to manipulate us to do as human beings. Please go and watch this one. It will change your lives, even if it's in a slightly terrifying way. But what she's given us is a framework through which we can understand some of the madness in the world. And what you'll see here is if you just click play, or of course you can go to YouTube to watch this as well. You can watch Isabel's talk. So we've already got that up online. Other things that we have for you as well, you can go back in time all the way to 2020. Do you remember 2020? It was quite a long time ago now, or maybe it was very recent, depending on how your worlds have been. You can go all the way back to our 2020 conference, and you can scroll down and you can click on any of the talks that were given back then when we started Responsible Raw Materials all those years ago. So Responsible Raw Materials is a not-for-profit. It's run by volunteers. And those of us who are involved, we get together because we really care about raw materials and we're fascinated by what different people think about them as well. And what you can see is if you scroll through our conferences, we've explored things like trust, we've explored things like the role of mining in a just energy transition. We've explored all kinds of things as we go through the years. We've looked at an ESG toolbox for responsible sourcing. So not just what is it, but how do you do it, whether you believe in the term ESG or not. Give us a break. That was back in 2022 before it became perhaps a banned term. But of course, if we scroll forwards in time, 2025 was all about collaboration. And this year in 2026, it's all about helping us to navigate this ever increasing change that we see in the world round about us. So some of the topics that we've been exploring over the course of the last few sessions that really come to mind in terms of what has struck us, it's not just Isabel talking about the collapse of objective truth, which, as I mentioned, was terrifying, but we've heard from the likes of Mark Fellows, who talked about decarbonising and the importance of really good data sets. We've heard from Rodrigo in South America talking about Indigenous peoples and what is the collaboration and the discussions and the dialogue that needs to be created around any project, be it a mining project or beyond. Jessica gave us insight to the circular economy and traceability of different materials. And then both Sean and our students talked about AI and the role of AI, not just in the world of learning, but what is needed to make AI a reality and the pros and cons that that means or can lead to with regards to raw materials. This morning was kicked off by the fantastic Jo Weston, who is a hydrologist or a water engineer, and she gave us some insight into some of the some of the key aspects that you need for a capital project and talking about how water should be a key factor of the design of a project rather than a risk or an afterthought, which it so often is. And that linked in very closely with Pat Bradshaw, who talked about the illusion of certainty in projects. So actually, a lot of the things that we call risks in the project space, they're actually constraints that we know about well before we start a project. But for some reason, we don't like to think about them up front. Perhaps they're some of the inconvenient truths. And so therefore, there's a very high chance of them coming back to bite us and being the reason why a lot of our big capital projects run over time and over budget. We heard from Diane in Indonesia, who gave the most amazing overview of what is going on in Indonesia with regards to artisanal and small scale mining, the governance that is in place from the government, and the fact that a lack of resourcing, along with a number of other factors, means that much of the artisanal and small scale mining is technically speaking illegal. They're not necessarily doing anything wrong, but because the governance isn't really working, it's called illegal mining. And that then, of course, leads to a whole world of problems with regards to many of the different people that are involved in those mining activities. Dennis, who's a social scientist based in Australia, but doing a lot of work in the Philippines, gave us an overview as to how a big research project is being constructed in the Philippines. And the trick has been putting the social science in the heart of the project, because actually it's a lot of the local community members who've been leading on many of the different research focus areas. That has then led to not only much better traction with regards to the research, but the outputs and the outcomes of the research to be much more useful to the local community. This is great because so often when we're doing research projects, we almost go in and then we come out and we go, excellent, I've written my academic paper, but what benefit has that actually given to that local community with whom I was working? So really exciting presentation to go and check out there. Christopher, excuse me, from Chatham House then attempted to give us a rundown as to how the US, the UK, Zambia, and Botswana make decisions in government. It is absolutely brilliant. And I've never heard anybody attempt to describe how those different governments actually make decisions in such a concise way. So if you want to find out what on earth is going on in America right now, go and listen to the first 5 minutes of that presentation from Christopher. He then goes on to the UK and then Zambia and Botswana. So it's really, really interesting. Edith, who is undertaking her PhD at the moment, she's from Malawi, but currently based in the UK. She gave us insight to how different ecosystem services tools, primarily AI online tools, can be used for exploring different mining land use decisions or just use of land. To be honest, it doesn't need to be to do with mining. And then finally, we went to Ecuador and we heard from Maria, who talked about different aspects of justice and sustainability. And she provided us with a huge array of facts and figures in terms of mining in Latin America. And the fact that really resonates with me is that in a gender balanced crew or shift team, the likelihood of there being a safety incident was reduced by 63%. I thought that was astounding. And having worked a lot, excuse me, in the world of health and safety and in the world of women in mining, I thought, wow, that is a powerful statistic. So go and check out Maria's talk for more on that. While I'm quietly dying here, we're then going to go across to session number 3, which of course is this afternoon. And you can see we've got a range of our fabulous speakers already online with us right now. These speakers this afternoon include everybody from Carolyn Burns and Natasha Ketter from Resolve. Resolve is a really exciting NGO that looks at mining in a very different way, but they don't just talk about it, they do it. And so Carolyn and Natasha are going to give us insight into some of their latest developments in the natural resource sector. We've got Pippa Edwards from Imperial College London, who is going to blow our minds with regards to cement and concrete and carbon within them. And yeah, she's got amazing things to share. So just watch this space for that. Professor Julia Sutcliffe, who's the Chief Scientific Advisor to the UK government with regards to critical minerals, she's going to come and join us and not only give us a bit of an overview with regards to the UK critical minerals strategy, but Julia is truly remarkable because she takes on so much information that is thrown at her from people not just across the UK, but across the world. And she doesn't just go, oh, yeah, very good, thank you very much. She actually listens to it. And I really admire Julia because she listens to it and then she comes back with answers. So no talk that she gives is the same twice because she goes away, she learns, and she goes and feeds out that information and she really listens and learns and feeds all that information into government as well, which is great. We've got Nigel, who so far is winning in terms of who comes up with the best title of a talk, who's going to say, Who wants to be a mineral heir? Oh, yes. Thank you so much. As a geologist, I love something like that. Nigel comes from the money side of things, and he said earlier on he felt a bit like the fox in the hen house, which is interesting describing yourself as that, Nigel. But having done a little bit of work with you, when I'm not ghosting you, of course, my sincere apologies for all of that. But having done a little bit of work with you, you are certainly not the fox in the hen house here at all. But really looking into how can we create certainty with regards to that world of capital. We've got Dineo, who is joining us from site at the moment in Southern Africa, who is going to give us a number of insights with regards to consent, which is particularly topical at the moment in the world. And finally, we've got Michelle Cilliers, who is going to open today's session or this afternoon session. Michelle and I, we met a number of years ago, shall we leave it at that, in Anglo American. So I was lucky enough to be doing a lot of work in South Africa, which is where Michelle and I met one another. And it's through that that I think I certainly learned a huge amount from yourself, Michelle. But I will stop sharing my screen so that you can come to the stage and start to wow us with your content. I'm really looking forward to hearing your insight today with regards to creating certainty in a world of change, a risk-based framework for critical supplier transition. So with that, everyone, please put your hands together for the fantastic Michelle Cilliers. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon to you, Sarah, and afternoon to everyone. Thanks for that lovely welcome, and it was a great pleasure to meet you and get to know you in Anglo American, Sarah. And congratulations on the tremendous work that you and the Sitala team are doing with this conference. I can't wait to go and review those tremendous presentations that you've highlighted. And it's a privilege to be on this panel with all those great speakers you highlighted. So let's get right to it. You have a supplier that you need to change, and how do you ensure that it's a success? So as Sarah's mentioned, I've worked on the continents of Africa, South America, and now North America, and one thing that's certain is change. We live in a time where change seems to be more evident than ever, whether it's wars or tariffs, and there's always something changing, and these results impact us daily. So today I'm going to share a framework which will set out basic steps to follow to ensure that you get reliable results. A recipe, if you will, to make sure that when you do transition a supplier, it doesn't flop. So to imagine the scenario of a major supplier that's been a part of your operation for years, sometimes even decades, but repeated flags begin to appear. What do you do when a relationship is established and the operation depends on that supplier, but safety concerns, production issues are becoming impossible to ignore? And production targets are not the only thing that's changing, but the operation is getting ready to expand. So the real leadership challenge is, how do you transition a major supplier without compromising safety or destabilizing the business? I'm going to briefly touch on 11 steps. It's not enough time, so please ask questions afterwards if you'd like to delve into anything specifically. So step one is identify the issues. Now, there's often a tendency to live with warning signs a bit longer than we should. Incidents are explained away and slow responses to corrective action are tolerated, but eventually patterns form. And when these involve safety, or repeated underperformance, leadership has to acknowledge that change may be required. Step 2 is to align on the non-negotiables. These are aspects that become critical to the decisions that you make throughout the process. The first is safety. The second could be achievement of output. The third could be continuity of operations. And these non-negotiables matter because they become the lens through which we observe all further decisions. And if they're not clearly agreed, we can become confused. Step 3 is engage the incumbent supplier. And this won't be the first time that you've done this. Concerns need to be raised with them directly, formally and factually. We need to understand what incidents have occurred and were the responses adequate? Has sufficient improvement been demonstrated? Can the supplier actually restore confidence in a credible way? And this is more than just communication. It's about testing whether the supplier actually understands the seriousness of the situation and whether remediation is realistic. Step 4 is to engage the operation itself. What we've seen is some of the biggest mistakes that companies make is assuming that supplier failure exists in isolation. But in reality, it's often operational pressures, unclear expectations, and poor management oversight, which contributes to the problem. So the business has to ask hard questions internally as well. Where are things going wrong? What is being measured? And have the right interventions been taken? Step 5 is about internal alignment. Key stakeholders, that includes operations, safety, and supply chain, come together to agree the case for change and define the path forward. Can the current supplier realistically improve, or do we go to market? And from a risk perspective, it's often useful to go to market anyway to understand the supplier landscape and to know who to contact in the future. And business continuity is another key risk to manage here. As the current supplier, it is important that they also receive a tender. If a supplier thinks that they may be transitioned, you may not get their full support or effort anymore. Sometimes additional charges that weren't in the contract or some shortcuts that are being taken. Step 6 is to define future state requirements. The team must be clear on what needs to change, what worked well and what didn't. And the scope of work is a critical document which sets out your requirements. Operations, safety, and supply chain need to take the time to ensure that the scope is comprehensive and that the current issues are addressed. Now, remember, as I'm chatting, this is just a recipe. It's some points for consideration. We can throw all the ingredients in and hope that we get a good result. But at the end of the day, if we miss the salt, it's not going to get the desired outcome. So again, some pointers to bear in mind when you're going through a process like this. Step 7 is going to market. Obviously, a formalized process that gets managed by the supply chain team. And then step 8 is the evaluation process. What we found to be extremely valuable in this part of the process is to actually take the time to contact the references. People are surprisingly open and willing to chat about their experiences. And it's important to capitalize on this to gain valuable insights. We had an instance where the incumbent received exceeding high praise from one of the major companies in the market, such that we had to sit up and take notice. And what we realized was that we were dealing with the C team. So also with regard to evaluations, it's useful to use a weighted evaluation process. In some instances, safety may carry the highest weighting, or if expansion is critical, this may be an area that receives the highest weighting. It's not always price and shouldn't always be price. Step 9 is a negotiated contract with KPIs. Look, I've skipped a lot of steps. This is not a framework for running an RFP. But when you've narrowed down your preferred supplier, it's important that the contract includes how the relationship is governed, as well as the recourse your company has if there is not the required performance. And KPIs do need to be developed to ensure that the key outputs of the scope of work are met and that are tied to performance. Step 10 is transition. And part of the negotiation is to agree implementation dates and phasing times. And depending on the service or product, this can take from 1 to multiple weeks. Part of that negotiation sees a commitment to working together with the incumbent for a smooth handover. And the company should work with both the incumbent and the new supplier to ensure the transition plans are aligned and to provide the appropriate support. Step 11 is management and continuous review. Supplier or contractor management is ultimately the critical element. It's important that the discipline is continued or, in some cases, established properly for the first time. A cadence of meetings needs to be established. If there's service type contracts, we need to ensure that there are daily sign-offs, that the work has been verified, that there are daily and weekly meetings with the requisite players, the operations, the suppliers, the leadership. They need to form part of the KPIs to ensure that there is ongoing performance measurement and engagement with the supplier. And importantly, this is an ongoing process. So that's the framework, 11 steps. Like anything, there's some fat in it. It can be strengthened and it certainly can be refined. It's a framework that you can revisit as a team and able to identify where you can improve certain things. Your business does not stop just because you're changing your supplier. You don't want change for the sake of it, but you don't want to be afraid to change because you don't know what the steps are or how to address them. The more we learn to manage it efficiently, the more resilient we become. And this is what creating certainty actually means. It's not the absence of change. It's not the absence of risk. It's about having a framework that holds when things get hard, so that when the pressure comes, and believe me, it will, business knows exactly what to do.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Michelle. Now, I know that you have those 11 points on a slide to hand.
Yes,
I wonder if you share them just so that we've got them for reference as we have a little bit of time for questions now. So everybody in the chat or in the Q&A or on YouTube, please feel free to post your questions for Michelle into the chat. But just to start with, Michelle, your 11 steps, these haven't come from thin air. They're based on 1 or 2 years of personal experience, aren't they? So what's the background to this? What's the history?
Well, Sarah, it's working with across a number of businesses, mining companies in South Africa, in Brazil, and currently in Canada. And working with some of the large suppliers that are providing critical services to the company, and being in positions where we have seen not kind of the right behavior or drops in behavior, drops in performance, and how do we deal with it while ensuring that the business continuity is in place. So being involved in the risk management program with Anglo American and on the supply chain, it was quite a good combination of skills that could come together so that when we approach these problems, we made sure that the risks were addressed, identified, managed, and the proper steps could be taken in order to make sure that the transitions happened smoothly. And there's always challenges and things that come in. It's never as smooth as one would like, and I think that the 11 steps come in a lot from the learnings that we've had. Some of the things that man, I wish we had done that. So it's really pulling in learnings from these experiences, and how to do it better the next time.
Yeah, so I guess with regards to this as well, the risk that people will always put on the table to start with, or I guess the conundrum is you've got the supplier, they're delivering a service or something to you that you cannot do without, because without it, either somebody's going to get hurt or production will stop or something like that. And so how do you go, well, actually, is there a better way of doing this? And is one of those things transitioning to a new entity? Is that the kind of the crux of the issue that we're dealing with here?
Yes, Sarah. So it is when you've taken that decision that there is no more remediation. You've had the discussions. You've done the cajoling. The threaten's a big word, but you've had the difficult discussions, and you're not seeing the commitment to the change or the enthusiasm to make that change. So it's when you have to then make a transition, how do you do it in the best way possible while still ensuring that your current supplier remains engaged? So and that's often the challenge, making sure that they're part of the tender process, and that they're competitive going forward as well. I mean, that's an important aspect. Are there opportunities for the whole system to be reviewed and to see a step change in performance with someone else?
Because I guess we're living and working in an ecosystem where there are loads of dependencies, aren't there, going in both directions. And we've certainly seen over the last few years, if something happens to, I guess, the end customer, or kind of, the major player in this, then actually by them, going on to care and maintenance or stopping, actually a lot of the suppliers then go bust as well, and the whole ecosystem falls apart. So I guess with this, is this something about being really careful with that symbiotic relationship that can sometimes happen, or am I over imagining here?
I think one always needs to bear in mind the impact of the supplier in the environment. Something that is really important here in Canada, and I believe some of your suppliers will be touching, some of your presenters will be touching on it, is your relationship with First Nations companies and groups. And one always needs to see how they part of this, how they impacted, can they play a role, are there areas for them to play a role. And if transitions are taking place where they are part of that, then of course it brings a totally additional level to those conversations, in terms of support and transition and equipping. So yes, so the ecosystem is always an important part of every transition, Sarah.
Yeah, and just I guess leaning into First Nations, traditional owners, Indigenous peoples, a lot of or sometimes, a certain aspects of the social acceptance, license, shared value, whatever terminology we want to use here, in terms of that relationship between, say, a mining operator or a project and people who live in the area, it's their home, is actually reliant on, hey, and we're going to produce this many jobs in the area or kickstart these inputs into the socioeconomic development of the area. How does that align? Because I think sometimes what I've certainly seen is that you want to find a local supplier, but they're not there, or they're not operating at the levels to which your criteria, for example, require them to be. How do you get across that?
So that's really an important aspect. And I think this is something that has been tested and done very well in South Africa, and we can learn from. And that is to have a long-term view in terms of what do you want to achieve, and working together for identifying what the long-term opportunities are, what are the long-term skills that are required, what are the long-term capital that is required, and working together to create that as an ongoing development. And it needs to be focused. Work needs to be done, and it shouldn't be seen as a transactional thing for each engagement. Oh, what are we going to do here? It must be planned and invested in as partnership. And there's plenty of opportunities to do this right, and it's something that we believe in and fully engage with.
Brilliant. No, thank you very much for that, Michelle. So a massive thank you to introducing us or giving us an explanation to your 11 fantastic steps. And good luck with everything in terms of what you're up to at the moment. It's really lovely to see you. Round of applause for Michelle.
Appreciate it.
Everyone.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Lovely to be on the program.
Thank you very much. Brilliant. So on the subject of South Africa, we're going to go from Michelle to the lovely Dineo. So Dineo is dialing into us from a mine site, I think, somewhere, or at least from a conference. I'm hoping that Dineo is still there. I know that she's logged in as a participant at the moment. There she is. Brilliant. You found a different place to speak to us from, Dineo. Dineo and I met a couple of years ago through the Rio Tinto Centre for Future Materials, and Dineo is phenomenal because not only is she able to survive in a room full of engineers and geologists, but she's also able to bring in the human aspect and the social aspect with regards to many of the, not just mining communities, but beyond that as well. And so I'd like to invite you to all please put your hands together for the fantastic Dineo. Thank you very much, mate. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for that generous introduction, and good afternoon to everyone in the audience. It's truly an honor to be part of this conference, and it's always also an honor to work with you, Sarah. And so, just to speak on the topic that I thought would be interesting for us to discuss, it's a burning question for me.
I think we may be losing Dineo in terms of her internet quality. Dineo, do you want to just turn your camera off?
I don't have all the answers with me, but I'd like to think with you and to share my thoughts and that of some of my society work in Politics Institute at Wits University. And so when I looked at the conference concept, and I was thinking.
Sorry, Dineo, we're just losing you in terms of your internet.
Okay.
If you'd be able to just turn your video.
Thinking about at the same. I'm going to try and shift to another network.
Perfect. Excellent. So just while Dineo is changing her internet at the moment, some of the work that I was lucky enough to come across that Dineo has been up to is really about the difference in social perceptions with regards to different initiatives that have been undertaken by mining houses. So especially with regards to accommodation in local communities around mines. Again, in the South African area, so be it with regards to platinum mines, coal mines, etc. as well. But Dineo, we've got you back. I'm going to hand back to you.
Yeah. I'm switching off my video again to just see if maybe that saves our bandwidth. But am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you. That's much better. Thank you.
Okay. Fantastic. Let me not waste time. I was thinking, I was reading a line which is very interesting. And I was thinking, in a time of complexity and uncertainty, the question is, can strengthening concern in communities help us attain certainty and attain a level of control social and political harmony, justice and restitution, particularly for previously marginalized communities. So that for me, that was a very key question about whether, strengthening concern really can help us deal with the question around uncertainty. And so what really informs this work is about 17 years of working in both platinum and coal mining affected communities, and also exposure to international law and international legal and normative frameworks. And what overarches, many of these frameworks, which are very rich, coming from different contexts, I'd say, as many of you would know, is the UN DRIP, which articulates the idea of free, prior, informed consent, particularly for indigenous people. And this is very useful, I think, for the rest of the world, particularly in thinking about sourcing for raw materials. Others call this moment as a moment of sourcing for critical minerals. And so in the South African context, which I wanted to share with you very briefly, and not just South Africa, but some of the challenges that are faced by the African continent, as broadly speaking, is the relationship between extractivism, governance, and democracy. So how do you think about that relationship or engagement of these three parts? And in South Africa, this is really concerning, and I'll say why this is really a problem. It's a problem because we've got a dual system of governance, where we have an institution that recognizes traditional authority or traditional governance. And this is a mixed energy system. And so the traditional authorities is recognized within the context of democracy. Now, if you think about traditional authority and its structure in South Africa, it's organized in 3 tiers, where we've got the headmen at the bottom who live in communities in the local context. And then you've got the chiefs. And then at the top, you've got the monarch or the kings, right? And then similarly, or parallel to that, you have the democratic system, which again, it's a 3-tiered system: local governance, provincial, and then national government. Now, all of these in some ways compete towards resource management or resource governance. But also what is worth remembering is that both also have got a sense of democracy, thinking about it in a way that are participate, and traditional leaders in South Africa are often deemed and in ways that are very conservative. And so then, because of that dual system, then you have communities who live on tribal or customary land, and that is where land is it's shared. Decisions are also meant to be made collectively. However, traditional authority presides over these lands. But one of the fundamental problems in these areas and in Africa is that these communities have histories of dispossession, and therefore they also don't have security of tenure, which means that many of them are not titled. So they don't have what you call a title deed, right? And so I've been curious over the years, and now even more curious, and this is shaping at least my thinking, and I'm hoping to shape other generation of scholars going forward in the next 5 to 10 or 20 years, to think about then, how does concern, or what would informed concern or consultation, or in its relationship to concern look like on tribal land, where you've got these presiding authorities who are very conservative, sometimes violent, and with sometimes competing interests to communities, but sometimes working in collaboration with the state in ways that are sometimes ethical, sometimes unethical. And so how do you then strengthen the concern in these kinds of communities so that you eradicate the uncertainty that frames we're thinking about today in this conference. So we've got IPILRA in South Africa, which is the Interim Protection of Informal Land Rights Act. And then we've got the MPRDA, which is the Mineral and Petroleum Resource Act of 2002. And in both, that's where the idea of consultation is articulated in ways to speak to issues that are concerned. But I'm arguing that one of the problems is that the issue of consultation needs to be, or rather consultation needs to be rearticulated perhaps as negotiation, because then that shifts the power dynamics in how we think about how we approach, for example, communities and how we include them in political binding decisions. And so my last submission is that I'm thinking here, and I would like to think collaboratively, with those who are interested in this subject matter, about how contexts like Australia and Canada with Indigenous communities and where some of these framing of the legislation, the international frameworks are stronger, and how could we think about how these shape how we intervene in South Africa and the rest of Africa. I'll stop here, Sarah. So it's really just articulating preliminary research thoughts, but also a trajectory that I and some of my colleagues are really curious about in going forward. And I'm so sorry about the internet. We are not home. We are on a research site. And so I have no control of the strength of the wireless here or, where we are. But thank you so much.
It's no problem at all, Dineo. So firstly, a massive thank you for bringing this into our conversation. So we're all giving you a virtual round of applause from our sides of the screen. And between Miranda, Aileen and myself, we've been writing notes into the chat that we hope reflect what you're saying to help with everybody who's listening along at the moment. Now, in terms of, you mentioned, so consultation needs to be re-articulated as negotiation. And I think that's really interesting, especially a lot of the work I've been doing over the last little while in, say, Canada, and really trying to understand what does free and prior informed consent really mean and what does it look like in practice. But from your perspective, especially within the Southern African context, what could this, or what does this negotiation look like? I say, hoping that Dineo is still there. Or we've lost her entirely. Michelle, how far away are you from Dineo in terms of this? Or have you done any work in this area in terms of consent or working with different peoples around the world? I'm bringing Michelle straight back into the conversation right now.
No, we haven't had a look at that. I think it's a very interesting aspect that Dineo has raised, and I think there will be a lot of good learnings that come out of this work.
I absolutely agree. I think, Dineo, are you back?
Nigel looks like he has a...
Yes, I'm back.
Excellent. Okay. Did you hear the question, Dineo, in terms of what could that negotiation look like?
Yes, I got it. Sarah, I think my thinking really is that negotiation starts from an understanding of the hierarchical context in the communities that we work in. And so it doesn't really place the communities at the bottom of the hierarchy. Mm-hmm. If anything, it recognizes communities as equals or as equal stakeholders in the conversation. And so consultation where you're simply ticking a box as a bureaucratic exercise, I think would shift in a context where if it's a negotiated process, you understand that communities can either say yes or no, but also you need to give them enough detail for them to understand what they're working with so that they know what the benefits or the risks are, for example, of us sourcing, let's say, minerals or materials and so on. So I do think it really disturbs the dynamic, the power dynamic of having, let's say, the developer, at the tip of the hierarchy and communities at the bottom, and therefore being told about the decisions that are already made. Whereas I think it's a moment to say, this is what we would like to do, or this is what we have found. And then you all negotiate until you arrive at the decision in a way that is more collective, rather than imposed in a way that is top down. And I do think that it can actually, the uncertainty often have or suspicion or the anxiety, the tensions or the risks. I think in business you speak about risks and I think that if we articulate or frame it, at least in our frameworks as such, maybe be it local or international, but in our case more locally, I think that would be a strength.
Yeah, absolutely. And then just with that, in terms of those negotiations and almost the power within them. So you talk about how do we make things more equal? In Canada, for example, it's actually up to, in British Columbia, as I understand it, it's up to the government to almost make sure that that consent is there. So it's not the mining company, it's actually the government that works with the First Nations groups, etc. There's a question that's just come in from YouTube, and don't worry, Nigel, I have seen you. We'll come to you in a second. There's a question that's come in from YouTube that talks about the Philippines and new projects being subject to local planning agreements that have been struck between relevant stakeholders. And I guess with regards to that, there's an element of power. There's also an element of what have you inherited in terms of those agreement structures in a particular area. Is that something where in South Africa or Southern Africa, there are things that the rest of the world can learn from Southern Africa, or are you at the very beginning of your research at the moment?
We are at the beginning of the research at the moment, we are here mostly because a lot has gone wrong. It does in South Africa and in most parts of Africa feel that for communities, for example, to realize their rights, decision making has to be made in courts. And this is partly because obviously, in development projects, communities, mining specifically, they feel that they don't benefit. Even when there's trusts, again, an area to study really closely and think about why is it that those do not actually trickle down to communities. And so I think, Sarah, to not take too long, is that there's a recognition of communities simply as far as land rights use are concerned, but not necessarily as those who also have a power or say about what is underneath, let's say, and which, of course, the decision thereof has been left to the state because it's considered as the custodian. So that is really the issue. And so, I mean, I don't want to paint South Africa or Africa badly, but it's something that we really need to take forward or think about clearly, especially as we shift to the green energy system.
Yeah, no, very true. And I guess every context is different, isn't it? Nigel, you wanted to come in with a point.
Yeah, it's just a couple of points in what you were saying. This slightly goes into what I'm going to be talking about, but never mind. I have been looking at the indigenous rights and how it is across three of the major sectors or countries, which are the Australia, Canada, and the US. And without giving too much away, Australia was ahead of everybody, quite frankly, because they have enshrined the idea of free, prior, and informed consent. FPICs for short. So that is the industry norm, where the indigenous people have to give consent in a free and prior way. So they can't just be sort of steamrolled over. You're absolutely right. In BC, they've now enshrined it in law, but at a federal level, there is an act, but it isn't quite as powerful as the BC one, which isn't surprising because BC is a significant mining area. And in the US, they have made efforts at it with prior administrations. And let's just say that the current administration has started to roll it back a little bit. And let's leave it at that. But it is something that needs to be taken into account whenever looking at any kind of mining development, not just critical minerals. And certainly when it comes to financing, one of our immediate questions is, what are the rights of the indigenous people? How are they involved? And going back to, I think, Michelle's comment that was being made about whether or not local suppliers can actually take things on board with their lack of expertise or whatever. Certainly in Canada, I know that there is a push to try and ensure that in those circumstances, the skill sets are transferred to the local people so the opportunity is given to them to develop. And there's a big push to try and expand things into the Inuit territories, etc., because they recognize that they're falling behind and need to be supported and not just replaced by technology coming in from other parts of the country. They've got to build out rather than just steamroll over them.
Yeah, no, very true. And I think with regards to this, Dineo, I mean, firstly, thank you so much for coming and sharing your thoughts with us here today. It's a really interesting research area that you're opening up at the moment, which is great. As you can hear, Nigel and myself, we've got thoughts. I think we'd probably be the first to say we are not the experts in this area. Is that fair, Nigel? And that there are people that we point to as in who are our FONA friends with regards to these areas. And actually yesterday, so we had yesterday afternoon, in the right in the middle of the sessions, we had Rodrigo, who was speaking to us from Santiago in Chile, and he was talking about free and prior informed consent from that perspective. And actually as well, Maria, who spoke this morning, she touched on it from a Peruvian perspective as well. So it's something, it looks quite different depending on where you are in the world. And I think actually Deanne, who was talking to us about Indonesia, there's an aspect of it that came in there too. So really exciting world of research. And Dineo, good luck with all of it. And we will say thank you so much for coming and joining us here today. Round of applause. Thanks, Dineo.
Thank you so much. And I'm so sorry about the unstable connection. And thank you for the contributions. Much appreciated.
It's all good, Dineo. The rest of the team are loving it because it's certainly keeping me on my toes in terms of being able to keep things flowing. It's all great. So he's already given us insight to what he might be talking about. Our next speaker is the one and only Nigel Hart. Now, Nigel isn't just going to talk about free, prior and informed consent in different parts of the world. No, in fact, what he's going to talk to us about is money. Nigel almost sounds like he's a bit embarrassed by some of this, but he did come up with the world's best title, especially if you've got anything to do with geology, because Nigel's talk is entitled "Who Wants to Be a Mineralaire?" Which, I mean, geologists love those kind of jokes, Nigel. We're still not seeing your slides at the moment.
I know, and I'm trying to remember how to share them. Apologies.
Okay. I'm going to keep talking until we get there, but I'm sure, Aileen, if you've got a version of the slides to hand as well, we might be able to be here as your backup. What I won't do is ask Dineo to share them because I don't think her internet would stack up to all of that. Nigel and we met one another a few months ago, and he's already given me the title of the world's best ghoster. And by that, it means that when he has sent me a message, typically on WhatsApp, and wants a reply, I don't give it to him. I don't even give him those nice little 2 blue ticks to say that I've read his message. I've just disappeared into the ether. Now, it's not because I don't love you, Nigel, because of course I do deeply respect you. It's usually because I'm on an aeroplane or I'm somewhere with similar internet connection to what Dineo has just managed to exhibit for us from somewhere within South Africa at this precise moment in time. But Nigel and I met because Nigel is involved in trying to raise capital with regards to an exploration project, which is very,
which we're going to talk about. Can someone remind me how to share my slides? Because it's gone through my screen.
Do you have your slides open at the moment?
Yes.
Okay, if you click share at the bottom of the screen that you're looking at right now.
I don't have that. I don't have a share.
Okay, I tell you what, Aileen, have you got his slides? Nigel, shall we share your slides for you? Let's go with that.
Absolutely.
There we go. Plan B. So everybody, please put your hands together for the one, the only Nigel Hart. Thank you very much. Over to you, Nigel.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to be talking about raising finance and trying to become a millionaire. Sorry. I'm having technology problems here at the moment because my screen has gone completely AWOL on me. Oh, there we go. So how do we become a millionaire? Very simply, really. I mean, I'm going to take you through the entire process. And someone's going to be clicking my slides for me. Could you go to slide 2? Right. So the first rule is when you're dealing about finance, there are lots of people out there who will talk about it. But unfortunately, what you're going to find is that you go through a process where the geologist loves the deal. The banker tells you they love the deal. The royalty company you may have approached also likes it. Family office does, sovereign wealth fund does. But then when you actually go to get it committed, there's no money. And therefore, we talk about having phantom capital where it's all promised. And I'm going through this right now as a project I am working on where I have been promised the capital 3 times now from a single source, and every single time it hasn't shown up. So let's talk today about where you can get the capital from. So moving to the next slide. There's a huge amount required. 1.7 trillion. Now I focused on the next one on niobium only because that's one of the projects I'm working on, and 92% of it comes from a single country, and there'll be no new big mines built in the last 50 years. So you would think that having a new mine would be a simple task, and as we're going to see shortly, that's absolutely not the case. We've also got this lack of certainty right now where everything revolves, let's be honest, around China. And we've got to move away. I mean, it's not to do with being anti-Chinese, but just having a single source, regardless of what you're talking about, is a bad idea. But having a single source of something that's so important becomes a really bad idea. And so everyone is racing to improve the supply. People are, in theory, throwing money at it with wild abandon, especially in the US, and we'll come back to that, to try and ensure that supply chains are no longer reliant on China and other parts of the world. Even looking at Brazil, which is a significant source of critical minerals, China has significant influence and also has significant purchasing power in that part of the world. Why the increased demand? You've heard it all: EV, wind turbines, etc., etc. Governments are deploying capital in various ways. You've got the DFC out of the US, UK Export Finance, European credit agencies, etc. They all have their own ideas about what it is they need to finance. And it's quite funny. A lot of them will finance processing, but when it comes to exploration, as someone from UK Export Finance put it at a presentation I went to, they don't want to risk taxpayers' money on exploration. I'm afraid I burst out laughing on the basis that there are other ways that they're using taxpayers' money. And I would have thought that trying to secure domestic sources of critical minerals was better than some of them. But anyway, so let's look at some examples if we could. Next slide, please. So we're going to go through sort of the 3 areas: exploration, building, and process. And that's really the way through to becoming a mineraire. I'm going to get my mouth around that shortly. So how do you get yourself help? Well, you phone your banker, you ask a royalty company, you look at 50-50 debt, but at the end of the day, you've got to go out there and raise capital. At the early stages, it's angel investors, seed equity, grants, which we'll talk about a little bit more, and really down at the grassroots of putting money up to drill some holes. When it comes to actually building, there's a bit more available. Development finance, again, still royalties, using convertibles. Even in some cases, you might find that the companies building out some of the plants will provide credit facilities as well. And then when it comes to the processing, that's where there's a lot of money coming in. I mean, the UK government is happy to finance this. NATO has some funds available. The US has funds available, etc. So at that end of the spectrum, it becomes a lot easier. So let's look at a few examples of how we might do this. So the first one is a case study, and Sarah will laugh at this one because she knows about it. We're looking at a project up in Scotland, in a beautiful part of the world. I used to live in Scotland many years ago, so I know how beautiful it is. And one of the challenges we're facing up there is not just getting the financing, but making sure that when actually doing the exploration, it is done in a way which is responsible and takes into consideration the environment, the needs of the community, and indeed just looking at how doing the drilling can also expand the knowledge of the area, the land, etc. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this one because I know that Sarah could talk to you for hours about it and keep it much more interesting than I could do. But it is quite challenging still to find this exploration money. So how are we going about it? They have done a seed equity. We are looking at government grants. Now here we're saying that we're looking for 675,000. What we're also saying though to the government in question, why don't we try and develop a process, a set of standards that can be used across the exploration industries in Scotland as we go forward. So they have a model to use to understand how best to explore and also, I can say exploit their mineral wealth, but at the same time not damage the environment and also ensure that further data is acquired. Now, I think if we go for the next slide, it will pop up the solution. So what we would do in this particular case is we'd look at all of them, quite frankly. The seed equity round, the government grant, convertible note. The convertible note really is a way of trying to get people to put money in at this stage and convert it into equity later. So they have effectively a debt to begin with a interest rate attached, and convert once a inflection point has been achieved at a discount to that level. So almost make an immediate capital gain. It's a way of encouraging people to invest. But the main overrider here still is it has to be done in a responsible fashion. If it's not, we're not going to be able to raise the capital, because people will look at it and say, this is just not going to fit with our strategies in the current marketplace. So we've now done some exploration. Moving to the next slide. Here we now have a question. We're looking at a project in sub-Saharan Africa. This has an interesting background and it causes us all sorts of problems. This was actually originally going to be a uranium mine, which was being financed by the Chinese. The Chinese did not find sufficient uranium in sufficient quantities to make it viable, so basically walked away from it. Jump forward about 10 years, and things like tantalum and niobium, back to my niobium thing, are often found where there is uranium. And in fact, the tantalum and niobium is worth a lot more than the small quantities of the uranium. So now they're reopening and redeveloping the mine. How do we finance this one? Obviously, there is the question of the Chinese involvement, and that causes its own problems. Would I regard that as being part of responsible raw material investing? Yes, I would these days, because we need to move away from the supplier issues that we've just talked about. And also the environmental and social standards that were being applied by the Chinese were somewhat different to the ones we'd want to apply today. So in this case, there's been significant social engagement. I mean, they've done schools and other things in the area. They are completely sort of transforming the social aspects of the development. They have got finance from regional banks, but it's very expensive. So we're now going, and we were looking to the US to finance it, but unfortunately, as I said, they've been throwing money things left, right, and centre, and the issue there is that a lot of the things they've thrown money at are not working out as they had hoped. I mean, I saw one report that they had acquired rights to minerals in the DRC. The only snag was it was in the part of the DRC that's controlled by rebels, not by the government. So a little bit of a problem there. And also they haven't built the railway yet to move the minerals from the DRC to the coast anyway. So they seem to have actually pulled back a little bit in terms of financing. So we're still looking on this one, I'll be honest. But again, the answer there, if I may have the next little slide, is D again. So we're looking really to find European finance to take out the regional bank debt, because it's about half the price, and also look for development finance from various international institutions to add to the stack. It's a challenge, I'll be honest. You know, just the place it's in and all the challenges around Africa, we're getting there, and I may have a solution by the end of this week, I'm hoping. So we've now done let's go to the other end of the spectrum. This was a project in which we haven't done, I quickly point out. I'm afraid in South Africa, with all due respect to the NEO in South Africa, the problem we faced here was a greenfield project. It was sitting next to a very large manganese operation with some major international players in it. But their strategy here was they wanted to raise $5 million to get on with it. When I say get on with it, they hadn't really finished all the necessary geological reports. They wanted to start digging and just get on with it. Open pit, prioritizing speed over the production, and over responsible minerals standards. So it was a bit of a problem for us, to be quite honest, which is why we haven't done it, because not many investors wanted to really throw capital into this without having proper environmental standards, proper geological reports, even though on the face of it, it looked very attractive. And the fact was, if I may have the next slide, the answer on this one was D. They were, if you like, it almost ended up being what I would call hurt money for them, because they were offering a 2 times multiple on invested capital plus a 2% life of mine royalty, which basically meant in about 18 months, you got your money back and you had a 2% royalty for the life of the mine. The NPV is about 13.6 million, 12% over 10 years, as you can see, which makes it a very attractive investment, which I think in a way reflects the uncertainties and the difficulties that this particular project was having. Moving on to the next slide. Now we're into the territory of the good stuff. Because here we're looking at waste in, strategic value out. This is where we really want to be, in my mind, with critical minerals right now, which is taking the stuff that's above the ground, available, it's waste, in some cases it's polluting, it's an environmental disaster. You can go and see piles of what we're talking about, not only here in the UK, but we've had interest from Canada, Australia, South Africa, and a few other countries, all of whom have got piles of coal fly ash or other coal waste products, slag heaps, to put it bluntly. And this technology is to start to extract critical minerals from this waste. So no mining required. The process itself is not as great as it could be, but I'm sure will develop over time to get more and more efficient. But it does mean that within a period of about 3 to 5 years, you could end up with a facility producing about 40 different rare earths critical minerals, fully refined here in the UK or in Australia or wherever else, without actually having to dig any holes or anything of that nature. Very profitable, because your cost of the feedstock is virtually zero, basically transportation costs, because you're doing the supplier, if you like, which is mostly governmental, a favor by doing some remediation on waste piles. You know, they've not known what to do with it, and now suddenly not only can they get rid of it, but also everyone makes some money out of it, and strategically very important. Circular economy, no new mine, domestic feedstock, ECA backed, etc. That's why this one gets a big green tick. Very difficult to argue with it. It also produces electricity, which can feed into the grids, and you get carbon credits. I mean, all in all, we have so many revenue lines on this one. Put it this way, the financial modeling on it is probably the most difficult I've ever had to do. But it's worth doing because the end result is just too good, quite frankly, to be true. This is the one which makes you become a millionaire. The other ones will make you weep a little bit, but this is the one. Going back to the millionaire thing, 30 years ago, and the Chinese, 30 years ago, I was working in Vancouver and I had a Chinese client. And one day she walked in and she said, I need to invest some more money I've got. We said, how much have you got? She said, about $1 million. This is 30 years ago. How did you make this money? She said, I trade rare earth elements. I had no idea what the hell she was talking about. But that just goes to show that 30 years ago, this was a Chinese individual trading and making money on rare earths, when probably every other government in the world wouldn't have been giving it a second thought. So I think that's where their dominance comes from. They weren't just early to the game, they were first by decades. Next slide, please. Oh, and next one, you can just skip that one. So where have we got to? Basically, to say phone friend. So if you're exploring, you phone your friendly angel, family office, seed venture capital, Innovate UK, prospect generators, convertible notes. When you get to the next stage, you're going up a notch. So you're looking at DFC in the US, BII in the UK. They're really good, BII also sometimes for stuff outside of the UK, in fact, more so outside the UK, as long as you have a strong social platform on it. They're really focused on what will the project do for the local community more than anything else. Then you've got development finance through royalties, offtake linked debt, etc. On the produce side, you know, you really are into fairly easy to get finance. The project finance debt, the big players in the streaming area, Wheaton, Franco-Nevada, etc. So the royalty companies, OEM equity, this is where you've actually got again, as I said, the equipment suppliers taking equity positions as well. And also potentially green bonds. And there are people out there, there's one particular company, if you're doing stuff in Africa and can show that you have green bonds, what they will do is provide you with effectively a sovereign guarantee on it. So it's AAA rated, and you can then sell that to institutions. You have to have a level of local debt as well, so they don't do all of it, but they do a nice chunk of it. But again, it has to show an environmental strategy, a social strategy. It can't just be them chucking money at it. They need to show that it is supporting the local economy and the local community, but a very powerful thing if you can get them to do it. Next slide, please. So what are the tests? Quickly through these, because I'm probably running out of time. Yep. Does the structure align long-term incentives? So royalties keep engaged. Again, pure debt, people are just coming in to make some money and get out of it. So probably not. Government backing, signal value. You've got to be careful you don't rely totally on grants and things like that. I've seen projects which seem to sometimes to be more like a vehicle to suck grant money in than to actually do anything. So you've got to make sure that it has a real viability and not just people sitting somewhere in the world taking grant money because they've got a great idea, but it never actually goes anywhere. And there are those out there. A bit worried I might have it on my desk at the moment. Improved environmental management plan. Yes, you must have one, because more and more people are going to require that, especially if they're buying your product as well. They'll want to see tracing it, etc. And is the feedstock circular purely again going back to the green one that shows that kind of project is where you can really win. I think that could be my last slide. Oh, so the prize is real. Governments are there. The opportunities are now, but don't just try and raise your finance from a single point. But as I'm trying to emphasize, through all of this, we now need to make sure it is done in a responsible way and not just, dare I say it, certain other countries' ways where the environmental aspects became second to actually just producing the minerals. So hopefully that gave you an insight to how you can raise finance, and hopefully we'll have a few people becoming mineral heirs. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very, very, very much for that, Nigel. That was absolutely fantastic. Now, in terms of questions and time, I'm going to invite Julia Sutcliffe, who I know is with us at the moment. Julia, if you're there, if you can turn your video and your microphone on, because that will just give us the satisfaction that you're there. Fantastic. Excellent. And I know that if you were listening, Nigel's just given us some really interesting ideas from a government perspective. Nigel, I think you were saving them specially because you knew that Julia was listening in. But what we'll do is we'll hop straight across to Julia, because I know that you're tight for time. And Nigel, at the end, we'll come back with some more questions for you, if that's okay, because that was
Sure.
fantastic. And thank you for giving us such a clear view of what goes on in the world of finance, because sometimes I think it's just magic in terms of what happens there. Certainly doesn't follow my logic anyway, with regards to that. So thank you very much, Nigel.
Thank
Again,
you.
absolutely
Pleasure.
brilliant. Brilliant. So, Julia, thank you very, very much for coming and joining us here today. Julia is a Chief Scientific Advisor to the UK government, and we come across one another every so often talking about critical minerals. And there's a fantastic advisory committee that convenes every few months, I guess, where it's got people from the world of investment, it's got people from the world of research, mining, exploration, sustainability, etc. And I feel really sorry for Julia and all of the government representatives, because we all just go, come on, get on with it. This is what you need to be doing. And I think that's easier said than done. So with that, if I ask you all to please put your hands together for the fantastic Julia, and I'll hand over to yourself. Thank you very much, Julia.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. That's such a kind introduction. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
Brilliant. And Eileen, I think you've got the slide deck as well. Fabulous.
Of course, I see that.
And I think I've got about 10 minutes. Is that okay? And then some
Yeah.
Q&A?
Perfect. Thank you, Julia.
Okay, so look, thank you so much for your kind words. Really delighted to be able to speak at this session this afternoon. As Sarah said, I'm the Chief Scientific Advisor in the Department for Business and Trade. And in that role, I advise the department on science, engineering, and work that underpins the sort of growth that we want to see throughout the economy. And that vantage point offers me a really strong view of the technologies that are shaping our future. And it's really clear that critical raw minerals sit at the foundation of all of our aspirations. So if I could just go to the next slide, please, then. So why critical minerals matter? So, as we know, a secure supply of critical minerals is going to be vital for our economy, for the growth that we want, for our national security, our industrial strategy, our clean energy transition. But we also know that they are increasingly exposed to global competition, market distortion, etc., creating great uncertainty. So last November, the government published a new critical minerals strategy called Vision 2035, which set out an ambitious sort of pathway forward with some key targets within it. The approach sort of builds on the UK's strengths, as you'd expect, so leveraging our expertise in midstream processing, recycling, drawing on the UK's geological potential and deepening that sort of international partnerships to build really diverse and sustainable, resilient supply chains. In fact, just last month, I think it was, I was in Toronto for the world's largest mining conference, PDAC, where I met with a number of global industry leaders and senior G7 officials to discuss precisely how we are going to go about this and put these ideas into practice. So really delighted to this afternoon be discussing what delivering the strategy actually means. So if you go to the next slide, it's worth emphasising then that the strategy represents a real step change in the UK's approach, and I'm hoping you'll agree it reflects a new era where competition for resource is increasing, pressures on supply chains are growing, and so the strategy is designed for this moment to look forward, be ambitious, and to hopefully equip us for the challenges ahead and the changes that we need to make to our approach. So the three sort of key pillars then. First of all, we've set out some ambitious goals to build our domestic resilience and diversify our supply chain. So as the strategy lays out, by 2035, we want to see 10% of our demand being met through domestic production, 20% through recycling, and no more than 60% of any critical mineral being imported from a single jurisdiction, a single country. We think these targets are achievable, and they're designed to give clarity to the industry and to investors, and to also signal to other nations that we are committed to the sector and we think we've got something to offer in this space. Secondly, we've introduced a growth minerals list, which is a forward look at a set of minerals that we think will be absolutely essential to the sectors that are going to drive the UK's future economy. And this list identifies the materials where demand is set to surge and where substitution is simply not going to be possible. So the idea is that this really allows us to plan ahead, to signal to industry and international partners the scale of supply we think we're going to need in, for example, advanced manufacturing, in clean energy, in defence, and making sure that we're positioned to secure those minerals before the global competition intensifies. And further to support our forecasting, we've also been working on, with industry, a demand aggregation platform, giving both ourselves and businesses a richer sort of UK-wide picture of what we think that future industrial demand and the time frame of it is going to look like, that will allow us to do more targeted engagement and support companies to secure that international supply and de-risk investment. The third element then of the strategy announced new funding of up to £50 million to support critical mineral projects by expanding research and innovation as well as supporting commercialisation. We've got further detail to be announced, and really excited to share more about how this programme is going to tangibly help us scale up the UK's capabilities and technologies across that critical minerals supply chain. And we think that sort of taken together, these updates strengthen the UK's long-term strategy. It reinforces our existing capabilities, ensures our focus is aligned to where we think global markets are heading, and crucially, how we will supply against our domestic demand. So if you could please move to the next slide then, turning to what this means domestically. So looking at primary supply, we've got exciting geological potential on our doorstep. We host Europe's largest lithium deposits and some of the world's largest tungsten deposits outside of China. So companies such as Cornish Lithium, Cornish Metals are already demonstrating the potential for Cornwall to supply future supply chains for batteries, for electric vehicles, for advanced electronics, etc. We also see there is new opportunities to be unlocked in geothermal drilling projects, so geothermal engineering LTDs. Projects could not only power 10,000 homes with clean, carbon-free energy, but can also produce lithium as a byproduct showing how, with a bit of ingenuity, we can create a dual benefit of solutions for energy security and critical mineral supply. And we think these developments, rather than just being geological successes, are going to represent high-value jobs, new industrial capability, and much greater security for the technologies that we're going to be reliant on in the future. So we're trying to build on our established industrial strengths and our processing and recycling capability. And indeed, we are home to the largest platinum group metals refinery in Johnson Matthey, and Europe's only cobalt refinery outside of Finland in Ai-Konikem. And earlier this year, as I'm sure you will know, Hypermag opened its rare earth magnet recycling facility, a major milestone in the development of circular and secure supply chains for rare earths. So this example of transformation from lab to production line is what we want to see more of across the country. And we think it's how we will build a stronger and more resilient circular economy rooted in innovation and reducing our reliance on sort of the primary extraction from overseas. From an investment perspective, we're seeing continued support to the sectors. So alongside the 50 million fund announced in the strategy, we've already committed more than, I think, 165 million to critical mineral projects across the UK. And this is including funding from the National Wealth Fund and programmes such as Drive 35 in the auto space, in addition to financing for projects via UK Export Finance. And we're working to improve the wider policy landscape for industry, which includes things like energy relief for certain activities through the British Industrial Competitiveness Scheme, and also streamlined planning and permitting, which we know has been really problematic. And these steps, we hope, will influence the speed and confidence with which projects can move from that exploration phase into operation. And in addition, we've published a new investment prospectus developed with the Critical Minerals Association at Innovate UK, and that sets out this sort of broader integrated UK offer that should give investors both here and overseas a single coherent view of opportunities across extraction, processing, recycling and technology in the UK. If we move to the next slide, let me then just touch on research and technology. Thank you. So further to the success of our domestic critical minerals sector, we've relied on strong innovation, strong science, and indeed the UK is fortunate to have really world-leading strengths in both of these. So the Critical Minerals Intelligence Centre, which is delivered by the British Geological Survey, produces really high quality data that can assist in the sort of policy making and has already been really instrumental in defining that list of critical minerals that I've talked about. And the UK R&D ecosystem is a really critical asset as well. Our universities, our research institutes, they lead in geoscience, materials engineering, clean processing innovation, and institutions such as the Cranbourne School of Mines are playing a really vital role in developing next-gen skills and technologies. And you will have seen much in the press about how UKRI is sort of working and tilting its focus to those core sectors of the industrial strategy, working with industrial partners on advanced extraction techniques, waste remediation, and technologies to make our future supply chain cleaner and more efficient. And these strengths are central to the strategy and will ensure that we remain competitive, we're forward-looking, and we're able to scale capabilities that can really shape the next generation of clean energy and advanced manufacturing technology in the UK. In terms of the international picture then, if you can just move to the next slide, we know that we can't operate in isolation, clearly. So we're going to need trusted partnerships, joint investment, and indeed shared commitment to really open and transparent markets. So the strategy places really strong emphasis on deepening those international partnerships, strengthening that multilateral cooperation. And indeed, through G7, the G20 and NATO, we're working with our like-minded partner nations to promote responsible sourcing and increase investment in new and diversified supply chains to drive up the overall global ESG standards. And we're also forging targeted bilateral partnerships to help secure key aspects of supply and unlock opportunities for offtake agreements, for example, to support mutual investment. And a recent example is the new Memorandum of Understanding between the UK and the US. And we hope that this agreement will help us unlock further investment in UK mining and processing and recycling and deepen that cooperation between our industries and researchers, and indeed through our finance institutions. Another example is how we've been working with the EU to develop more integrated supply chains. So we've seen progress with Tungsten West being announced as an EU strategic project, and we're going to continue to explore further collaborations across supply chains and financial markets, and potentially also work really closely on that demand aggregation. Beyond the US, we're deepening collaboration with Canada, with Australia, we've talked about EU, but also with Japan, India and Greenland. And also we signed a roadmap with Kazakhstan earlier this year. And I guess there's a range of international partnerships that you can see there where we are committed to diversifying those partnerships and enhancing our market access, and indeed reinforcing the UK's role as a real trusted partner on responsible mining and high standards, as we've mentioned. And then, of course, not to forget, London remains the world's most important centre for mining capital. And our markets, the London Stock Exchange and London Metals Exchange, to AIM and AQUIS, raise more capital for mining and critical minerals projects than any other hub of a comparable scale. And that financial depth, combined with leadership in legal, engineering and standards, makes us a really good place for raising capital and securing those offtake agreements. So to conclude then, the critical minerals strategy, I think marks an important moment for us. It reflects a changing global environment. It sets out a clearer plan to really strengthen resilience, enhance capability and support long-term economic growth. And across domestic extraction, processing, recycling, across international partnerships and multilateral cooperation, and across investment, innovation and intelligence, we've got a whole range of activities that are well underway. So I think we've got the potential to shape the future of critical minerals in a way that supports our industrial strategy, strengthens our national security and accelerates our clean energy transition. But we need really strong partnerships with industry, with investors and with our international partners. And of course, scientific excellence will be a key part of that too. So look, I hope that you agree with my thoughts on the strategy. And look, thank you very much for your time today. And Sarah, I'll hand back to you, and happy to spend a few minutes on questions if that works for you.
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much, Julia, for giving us that overview of what's going on from a UK perspective. So everyone, please put your hands together for the fantastic Julia. Just in terms of questions, so Julia, I guess when you came into this space of raw materials, because of course mining's not your background.
Indeed.
What was your first impression? What surprised you? Yeah, what did you think?
I think one of the things that I see lots of fantastic ideas. I mean, we are blessed in the UK with lots of ambition, fantastic baseline to work from. We're brilliant we've got lots of data, we've got lots of Cranbourne School of Mines, for example, and lots of industries and appetite to innovate. But I suppose what I didn't see was how that gets coordinated into a set of, these are the targets we're going to aim for. This is where we want supply to come from, and this is the demand that we want to signal. And I guess what this strategy has done is bring some of that clarity. And of course, when I came into this role, we didn't have an industrial strategy. And that work has, following the sort of the consultations, etc., has aimed to create a real partnership platform between government, between industry, between universities, to clarify these are the areas where we think we can grow because we think we can compete internationally in those areas. This is where we have domestic demand. These are the things that need aligning in order to realise that demand from regulation, from investment, from skills, etc. But then also against those key sectors, here are the foundational industries that are super important. And I guess that recognition that minerals supplies into those growth sectors, therefore we better have a really targeted view of exactly what we want if we're going to deliver that ambition. So I think being really numerate about it and making choices is a change I've seen over the last couple of years, which I think is positive, because it is simply not possible to just spread money thinly across everything. You have to be really purposeful in the choices that you make. And in very recent times, we've seen, the geopolitics and the Middle East has shone a light again very strongly on the fact that we have global supply chains, and we really need that sort of secure and resilience angle on everything that we do, as well as just growth. It needs to be secure and resilient growth. Reference the Chancellor's speech a couple of weeks ago.
And with that, I mean, you mentioned, it'd be very easy to spread a little bit of money very, very thinly across lots of projects and go, oh, look at all this stuff that we're doing. But actually, none of it would be, or very little of it would be meaningful material. You must get bombarded by people going, we should be doing this, we should be doing that. From I guess, what would help you? Like, how can we improve how we share thoughts and feelings or whatever with you? Because there must be, I mean, there's so much information that is thrown at you and so many requests and so many people saying, I've got the silver thing that we should be doing.
Yeah, that is absolutely true, and it's super challenging. But the critical minerals community and the industry and the academia in this space has already been really helpful in answering the sort of industrial strategy consultation and indeed supporting with the development of this strategy. So a massive thank you to the help that you have provided to date. If I think about my previous career, the strategy is the easy bit. Yeah, the really difficult, challenging bit now is how we actually implement and deliver that and stay to the course. And if something isn't working or something is blocking, then we identify that quickly. We pivot where we need to pivot, but we highlight as soon as we can improvements in the plan that is going to actually generate the outcomes that we need. So I would really encourage the community to work through the things that we have, like the forum that we have on critical minerals, where we get the opportunity to have a really safe space conversation around what's working, what isn't working, what's in the way, what could we do. And of course, we're doing this against a backdrop of a dynamic environment. So it's really important that that conversation is live and topical, because we are not operating in a static field here.
Yeah. No, absolutely. If there's one thing certain, is that things are changing very rapidly. I've got two final questions for you. One of them comes from the chat from Meenal Patel, who asks, We'd love to know any specific government support for new innovation, specifically for critical minerals and mining startups. Now, I know that you referenced a number of them in your presentation, but do you want to re-emphasize any of those or highlight any others?
I would simply say that you will, I hope, be delighted to know that Department of Business and Trade is working really closely with UKRI, so that we want to have a really coherent government position around what are the funding options, what's available for early stage versus later stage work in the critical minerals space. So I would encourage you to sort of work through your contacts in Innovate, in UKRI, the research councils, and in DBT, because we are committed to really clear join up within government and our sort of public bodies, so UKRI, to make sure that we are consistent in what we fund, and we are consistent with the community in where the opportunity space is. So I won't talk to a specific example, but again, my plea to you would be, if you think there are glitches in that, if you think there are discontinuities, please flag them to us, because we are absolutely committed to make this work. We need to make sure that when we spend taxpayers' money, we are spending it in the right place with the right levers working in unison to get the maximum benefit for UK taxpayers.
Now I can see Nigel smiling behind his hands at the moment. I'm not going to bring Nigel in because that would be dangerous, because we'll be here talking about it all afternoon, which would be no bad thing, to be honest. But I think one thing there is actually just the speed at which things are changing. So if we go back to 2021, when COP26 was held in Glasgow, I was really lucky in that I was invited to go and represent part of geoscience at the conference. And yet I was dismayed, because I was informed, no, this is no place for mining, because what role does mining have in the energy transition? At which point I thought, okay, in terms of awareness and understanding, we have a distance to travel. And I think massive credit to everybody in terms, because what happened was within 6-9 months, the first strategy was put together. We're now on version 3. And as you say, the easy thing is the strategy. But this version is better than the first version. So that's a good trajectory. We also, back in 2021, we didn't have an industrial strategy or anything like that. So it was quite difficult to know, well, when we're thinking about what our critical minerals are, we don't even know what energy mix we're aiming at in the UK. So I guess in terms of those changes and things happening within government, Julia, is there, I know you can't give away any secrets or anything like that, but are you heartened by the fact that things do change and things do evolve? And I think now in 2026, there are far more people who are thinking about and changing things with regards to raw materials compared to just 5 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say that the framework of, you know, the industrial strategy, trade strategy, small business strategy, national security strategy, etc., are providing the mechanisms for a more interventionist approach in terms of that government. Oh gosh, hang on a minute.
Talking about energy strategy.
A more targeted interventionist approach with clarity around the outcomes that we want domestically. So I think that's really helpful, and it signals a different direction from this government, which has been sort of a consistent narrative over the last in the last 18 months or so. So that's really, really helpful. I think also, I mean, you sort of mentioned sort of, you know, mining and people thinking that's not part of a plan. Of course it is. We always need to be better at telling the story.
Mm-hmm.
You know, mining's completely changed, hasn't it? Clearly. So being able to sort of tell the right story and advocate to the right communities, that's always a work in progress, isn't it?
Yeah.
And yeah, things are changing around us, but therefore that's why a kind of really tight dialogue and partnership between government and industry and academia is essential, because we've got to be able to do this together. So yeah, but again, if that looks like it's not working or there's something challenging it, then please flag it as soon as you can.
Yeah. No, I think with all of that, you can see the sort of the positive shift that's going on at the moment. Is it fast enough for lots of people? Probably not.
Probably not.
But as well, the world is moving faster and faster, and I think we're all trying to cling on to it at the moment anyway. But I think one thing that has changed is, so, you know, you mentioned Camel School of Mines. There is another, and this is where I earn my salary at Imperial College London. There's another much better School of Mines called the Royal School of Mines, that's based at Imperial College London. I say that in jest. There's a big rivalry between Camel School of Mines and the Royal School of Mines. But I think that rivalry and that internal competition is a good thing, because of course that then, you know, drives what is considered to be good up. And one of the things that's been very interesting is that the fact that there's a lot more focus on critical minerals, and also as well from a funding from a research perspective that allows other universities who have got that heritage and they've got the skills there within the departments to be able to lean into those areas. And so this is my beautiful segue into our next speaker, if Pippa wants to begin to get ready, because Pippa is actually at Imperial College London. Pippa's not actually in the Royal School of Mines, but we will forgive you that, Pippa. That's quite all right. But I think that this is something here that by getting more people involved, welcoming more perspectives, more disciplines, more skill sets into this challenge that we're all looking at the moment, that's how we're going to be able to address it, rather than just relying on whoever was left over from the last time people were talking about mining. But with that, I'm going to say a massive, massive thank you to Julia. Everyone, please put your hands together for the fabulous Julia Sutcliffe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. That's so kind of you. Thank you. And enjoy the rest of your meeting.
Thank you very much. Brilliant. So with that, you saw that fantastic segue from the UK government to the amazing Pippa Edwards. And Pippa's going to give us insight into one of those areas that actually does get, I mean, it gets quite a lot of attention. It should get a lot more, because if we're looking for quick wins, I say quick wins, if we're looking for big wins in the world of, say, carbon footprint, etc., one of the areas to crack is the world of cement. Now, with that, I'm going to ask you to put your hands together for the fantastic Pippa Edwards. Thank you very much, Pippa.
Thanks so much, Sarah, and thanks for having me. So my name's Pippa, and I'm a doctoral researcher at Imperial College, not at the School of Mines. I actually sit in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering, but I'm actually a chemical engineer. So you can kind of you can sit in multiple different areas and be working on interesting problems. So my PhD work is part of a European Union Horizon project called Detox, and we look at cement decarbonisation. So I study the environmental performance of one decarbonisation option for cement, which is low clinker cements. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about how they work, responsible material use in cement, the kind of carbon problem we have in concrete, and focus on how we can, I guess, problem solve using low clinker cements to support decarbonisation. Did that slide move? Great. So concrete is a critical material. It's one of the most widely used materials in the world. You're probably looking at some right now in your field of vision, and that's because it's cheap and durable, and it's essential for modern infrastructure. So in 2020, global use of concrete reached about 14 billion tons, and that required about 4 billion tons of cement. The demand for concrete products is only expected to grow to 2050, particularly in non-OECD regions to support development and urbanization. But that's over the same time frame that we've got a carbon problem. So our appetite for cement accounts for about 7 to 8% of global anthropogenic CO2 emissions, making it a focus area, as Sarah said, for net zero. But I think there's huge potential in cement decarbonisation, and not only some quick wins, but useful wins. The challenge is really clear. We have to meet these reduced emission goals and meet the increasing demand for concrete products that support development and urbanization. And because a lot of the demand is in emerging markets, it's critical to prioritize decarbonization strategies that are also cost effective. So it's not good enough to kind of slap a carbon capture unit on current production and call it a day, because that'll increase costs dramatically. So most of cement's CO2 emissions come from producing a material known as Portland clinker, which is the main component of modern cement. We call modern cements a Portland cement because of their similarity visually to the high quality Portland stone. That was so it's a bit of a branding thing. But the way we make clinker is we heat limestone with siliceous materials at high temperature. This process releases CO2 both from the chemical reaction, which is difficult to abate, and from fossil fuel combustion. So it's about 1450 degrees in the kiln. Producing 1 ton of clinker has a carbon footprint of about 850 kilograms of CO2 equivalent. So one of the key strategies in cement decarbonisation is to lower the clinker content in cement, and it already works and we already do it. Today's cement that you'd use or buy is already blended and contains on average about 75% clinker by mass. The target for 2050 is that the average global cement needs to fall to about 52% clinker. But we want we want to maintain the performance and make sure that we continue making good quality, strong, durable concretes. One of the challenges in reducing the clinker content from today's levels is the availability and the reactivity of substitute materials, which has driven significant research into identifying potential materials. And that's demonstrated here on the chart on the right, which encompasses kind of all the literature into researching new material compositions that we can use in cement. That includes traditional substitute materials like blast furnace slags and fly ash, to exploring areas like mine waste, biomass ashes, and even new manufactured products like calcined clays. Having trouble changing the slide. Okay, so to understand these materials better, it is briefly useful for everyone to understand how cement works. So here's a little Cement 101. Cement is a powder that reacts with water. This reaction is known as hydration, but cement is more complex than just a powder, and it contains many different reactive mineral phases. However, as hydration progresses, these reactive phases dissolve in the water and they precipitate lower density hydrate phases. These phases fill up the space that was previously occupied by water and bind everything together in the strong, solid concrete. So cement clinker contains reactive calcium silicate phases, which we've made at high temperature and they're pretty unstable, which dissolve quickly. And they precipitate the hydrates and another phase called Portlandite. Clinker substitute materials generally react more slowly and they consume Portlandite to produce hydrates, which means that they mainly contribute after the clinker has been reacted. And it also means that we can't fully displace clinker in cement. So overall, strength development comes from dissolution and precipitation reactions, with clinker dominating in the early stage and early strength development, and substitute materials contributing later. So my research kind of combines 2 areas and techniques. I do life cycle assessment, and I also look at modeling cements to evaluate both the environmental impact and the technical performance of cement mix designs. So with life cycle assessment, we calculate environmental impacts by quantifying the inputs and outputs of material and energy into a system. But a key challenge for, I guess, emerging materials is access to limited data. So traditional LCA is generally based on operational surveys, but we can prepare data from multiple sources, such as process modeling and other technical reports. Once we have life cycle data, we can use it to evaluate cement mix designs if we also understand their performance. But as we've just discussed, the design space for potential cement mixes and different materials is really large. So being experimentally validating all of these material combinations is impractical, time consuming, and expensive. So we use modeling techniques to estimate the performance and first identify promising mixes before we get to that, I guess, later experimental certainty stage, where in our models, we're combining the reaction kinetics, so how much material dissolves, with thermodynamics, which predicts which phases form in cement. Then once we have the phase formation, we can use that to estimate properties like compressive strength and understand the durability properties, which allows us to compare different cements fairly based on both emissions and performance and go for a kind of apples to apples basis. So part of my work involves collecting data on how different clinker substitutes are produced. And we can then compare emissions from common processes that we use, like calcination, drying, grinding, and quarrying. Comparing data sets between materials also helps us build confidence and certainty in the result, and helps us identify both lower impact production routes for producing clinker substitutes. And we can use this data to then estimate emissions for new materials which might use the same processes. However, this level of analysis doesn't yet tell us how the materials will perform in cement. So more reactive materials are likely able to displace more clinker for the same performance. To assess the reactivity of clinker substitutes, a common experimental method is called the R3 test, which uses a simplified hydration experiment to measure the amount of heat released and the bound water. Performance also depends on some physical properties like particle size and mix design. So predicting behavior of the clinker substitute materials is an ongoing research challenge. But by using R3 heat release as a proxy for reactivity and comparing reactivity and emissions from our LCA data, we can identify materials which might have good performance as composite cement mixes, like calcined clay, which has both high reactivity but also relatively high carbon footprint compared to the other substitute materials. Even so, the higher emission clinker substitutes roughly have half the emissions of clinker. So replacing the clinker with these materials will reduce the overall impact of composite cements. And just an example here is some mixed designs that we've calculated compared to a high clinker CEM1 cement down to about a 50% and lower clinker cements made with limestone calcined clay and blast furnace slag. So what we see from this is that the degree of substitution is more important than the specific material used. So higher footprint substitute materials can produce lower footprint cements if they allow more clinker to be replaced. And calcined clay is particularly promising because it's produced from widely abundant common clay deposits and at a comparable cost with conventional cement. And the performance is there as well. So limestone calcined clay with 50% clinker has been experimentally validated to have comparable mechanical performance to conventional cements. So we can meet our 50% clinker factor target with calcined clays, but what can we do to go further? And that brings us back to clinker, which it kind of gets a bad rap in the cement story because it's bringing all of the emissions, but it's super reactive and we know the chemistry really well, so we know how it works. And clinker is like really poorly, it's got a wide definition of what can be a clinker. And it's made of these reactive calcium silicate phases. And the most reactive phase is known as alite, which is tricalcium silicate, which is highly reactive, but it also has the highest carbon footprint of all of the clinker phases due to its calcium content, which again creates a trade-off between emissions and performance. So what we did was we studied clinkers, varying the concentration of alite in our model, compared to the less reactive but lower emission B-like clinkers. And our modeling shows that by increasing the A-like content, it increases the volume of hydration products at early ages, as well as the mortar strength, and results in more formation of portlandite, which supports the reaction with clinker substitutes. So optimizing the clinker composition can actually enable further substitution of clinker than we see in conventional cement mixes now. And when we look at that on a unit strength basis, the best emissions per strength results come from the higher strength systems, which have the higher A-like content clinkers, which highlights, I guess, the same thing we saw with the clinker substitutes, is that higher emission materials can produce lower emission cements depending on how we use them. So we can also use this integrated modelling approach to study decarbonisation strategies at the clinker level, which include alternative fuels or alternative raw materials, which can decarbonise the clinker, but as they change the clinker chemistry, they may actually result in less reactive and therefore less substitutable clinkers. So it reinforces the need for integrated approaches to understanding cement decarbonisation strategies. So that's kind of a whirlwind tour of the world of cement decarbonisation. And I guess the key takeaways is, yes, clinker substitution is a key strategy for decarbonising cement, but it's not just about selecting the lowest emission materials. We have to consider them in tandem to performance. And clinker's not the bad guy. So we need to really consider the high potential in optimizing clinker as part of the low carbon cement story. And overall, both the clinker and substitute materials have to be considered together to achieve high performance, low carbon cements that we need for, I guess, net zero. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Pippa. Everyone, round of applause for the fantastic Pippa Edwards. Now, the first question, that is one of the most important questions, is who came up with the title Detox? Because that is genius.
Yeah, that's one of my co-supervisors, Wilson, who works at Fuller Technologies in Copenhagen. So I'm in an industrial PhD, so we work with a few different companies. But yeah, he came up with Detox as the kind of project name. And it does have an acronym, but it's not at the forefront of my mind. But yeah, he's very good at the coming up with the good names.
Yeah, no, it's a good one. So with this, in terms of your research, so I mean, it's fantastic in terms of what you're finding at the moment. What comes next? Like, how do we get some of this actually into the world so that we can see those positive changes?
Yeah, so I think in terms of what comes next in the cement world, I guess there's an acceptance of calcined clay and so-called like limestone calcined clay LC3 systems as something everyone really needs to push for. And we're seeing a lot of investment in producing calcined clay systems. So I would say there's a lot of momentum there for these, introducing new materials. In terms of what comes next, getting something like a high alite clinker from, a paper that we published this year to a production system is obviously takes time. So it's important, I think, to have like the staged rollout of different materials and people, I guess, being aware of in industry what materials are available, and a lot of it comes down to the local market factors. So a material out of the wide range of materials that are being investigated, there is not really one solution for each local context. So I guess it's more of an awareness, but there's plenty of action on the industrial side in cement. My industrial background is more in the energy sector, so I was really pleased coming to cement and seeing how integrated the academic side was with industry. So I think it's really promising. It's a promising like slice of the pie to see people actually getting after the easy wins.
And so with that, so from an industry perspective, if you are a concrete company, you want people to want concrete because that's, I guess, the underpinning demand side of your business. But I guess with regards to the broader picture and the carbon footprint, the climate side of things, I remember we had a conversation with yourself and one of your supervisors, Rupert, and you shared some fascinating figures around, well, actually, if we got rid of concrete, or instead of building our buildings from concrete, we built them from wood, that actually is a meaningful shift.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's not necessarily even just in when, or I guess my work is looking mainly at the cement mix design and how much we can reduce emissions in that area. But, you're right that there's a whole series of changes that can happen together in terms of, at the construction stage, do we need to use as much cement and concrete to build the same structures? Where can we replace other materials? So yeah, there's a huge, I guess, area of opportunity to introduce new materials across the whole kind of construction value chain without just focusing on, my work is very concrete, cement, clinker, A-light, which is a very kind of narrow view.
Sounds like a PhD.
But yeah, there's you can go wide and you can go deep on a whole bunch of materials to support decarbonization in construction.
Yeah, no, absolutely brilliant. So I think with that, Pippa, I know there are lots more questions, and I've been messaging with people behind the scenes around concrete being degraded by the steel that's inside it, all of this kind of stuff as well. But maybe we come back to that later.
Sure.
Everyone, please put your hands together for the fantastic Pippa Edwards. Brilliant. Thanks, Pippa.
Thank you. And I'll
Brilliant.
stop sharing.
Excellent. Cool. So next up, everybody, we are going to move into the world of NGOs. And I'm going to welcome Carolyn and Natasha to the stage, as it were. And they're from an organization called Resolve, and I'm sure you're going to explain what that's all about. And they're going to talk about strengthening local governance in the natural resource sector. So with that, I know that Carolyn, excellent. I can see you. You've come off mute, and we've managed to get the screen sharing, which is absolutely brilliant. Everyone, please put your hands together for the fantastic Carolyn and Natasha. Over to you.
Hi, I love these openings, Sarah. I'm feeling very good about myself. Very warm welcome. Thank you, everyone. My name is Carolyn, and this is Natasha. And Natasha is actually going to kick off for us.
Yes. Hello. Hi, everyone. Wherever you are, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It is such a pleasure to be here today to contribute to this conference. So we want to first off say thank you very much for the invitation. We are so excited to share our experience with strengthening local governance in the natural resource sector. So let me get started by introducing ourselves. So first off, let me introduce my colleague, Carolyn. There's a great photo of us here together. This is Carolyn Burns. She is the director at Resolve and the head of the Resource Exchange. She's also a social performance practitioner with a background in international development and in the international development sector, mining industry, and has expertise in inclusive facilitation, working with people around the world. And I am Natasha Ketter, program manager at Resolve and manager of the Resource Exchange. I also have a background in international development, project management, strategic communications, and I've worked with INGOs, civil society organizations, universities on various multi-stakeholder initiatives. Both Carolyn and I have worked all over the world in our careers, but now we're both based in Toronto, Canada, where we're pretty much always busy wrangling our small children on a daily basis. So we have some calm now. It's quiet now, so we can present a calm moment.
Thanks so much, Natasha. Thanks.
I'll pass it on to you.
So Natasha and I are really excited to be here today. We love talking about this work that we're doing at Resolve, which and an initiative that we've started called the Resource Exchange. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the context within which we are doing this work, and then Natasha is going to jump in and talk more about what the Resource Exchange is and what we're learning from some of the work we're doing with it. So Resolve, also just to answer Sarah's specific question, Resolve is a nonprofit that specializes in multi-stakeholder collaboration. So we do a lot of work in the nature conservation space, the health space, and also the natural resources space. So our team has tons of experience in different natural resource sectors. We specifically are working in the mining space, but you'll hear me sort of interchangeably reference natural resources. And by that, we are talking about mining, both industrial and artisanal mining, but we're also talking about all the other ways that we are putting pressure on our land and resources, including for energy, agriculture, different infrastructure projects, and also nature projects, which a lot of the things that we're talking about here relate to as well. So when we think about all of those things that we need in the world, the food, fuel, materials, we know that they come from local communities. And one of the things that has really been prevalent in both of our work and in Natasha and I's work is just how different it is when communities are actually involved in decisions about how those resources are used, and how when that happens, we're able to more responsibly produce, access, and value those different resources. We know that natural resource development is a catalyst for change. That might be, I don't know, maybe even too soft of a way to explain it. But what we see is that whenever there is natural resource development, there is a big change, and what we're often focused on doing is balancing that change and trying to manage that change. So that includes things like mitigating some of the negative impacts that can come from natural resource development, as well as sharing some of the benefits, but also engaging the various stakeholders and rights holders that might be impacted or benefiting from that kind of natural resource development. This is a picture of a fellow named Tashao Nick. He is Tashao means chief in Guyana. And he is the Tashao of an indigenous village in southern Guyana in the Rupununi. And we took this picture when we were doing an interview with him, and he was literally talking about the ways that his community members were trying to balance out the potential opportunities around jobs and economic benefits with the very real impacts on the land, and then what would happen if there were some more mining activities and what kind of in-migration that might also bring into their region. So we like this picture because I think it really speaks to the intensity of those decisions and how important it is and what it means to be leaders who are thinking about that. I'll also say one thing. You'll see lots of great photos in this presentation. We get to work with a woman by the name of Jody Vinvogel, who's based in Cape Town. She's a photojournalist, and is her expertise is working with people, community members who want to tell their story. So if you're interested, you can look her up, and you get to see lots of beautiful pictures as part of this presentation. So one of the ways that we know we can better manage the changes that come with natural resource development is when there is strong, inclusive, Indigenous and local governance, I should say. And when we see that, there are just better outcomes for people and planet. That includes the community people and community members that are impacted by natural resource development, but it also creates better outcomes for businesses, for governments, for other stakeholders that are connected through a landscape. I also just want to take a moment to call out that when we say Indigenous and local governance, we're doing that specifically because in many parts of the world to recognize Indigenous rights is really important, and those can be recognized through different mechanisms. But there are also local communities around the world who are also using different governance mechanisms, even if they aren't reflected in different sort of Indigenous frameworks as well. So what we've seen is that, unfortunately, even though it can create such great outcomes, is that Indigenous and local governance systems are often disconnected from decisions about natural resource development. So what we see is that there's gaps in dialogue, capacity, and resourcing for communities. So those literally the conversations and the discussions that are happening at a community level are disconnected from the impact assessment, permitting, regulatory processes that are happening in different places. We see inconsistent and disjointed expectations and incentives from a range of stakeholders. We see this really as a systemic issue where different stakeholder groups are incentivized to achieve different outcomes, which are not congruent with reinforcing Indigenous and local governance systems. And then we also see a really limited opportunity for different rights holders and other stakeholders to connect to outside of even those big decision-making moments, to even understand each other and to spend time building relationships that allow for better alignment and collaboration. And we do know that strengthening local and Indigenous governance also requires a range of different stakeholders and rights holders to work together. If we think about our big system for natural resource development, both thinking about upstream and downstream, There are different groups of people who hold different responsibilities, who hold different power and different influence. And while everyone might have a different role, they do have a role in reinforcing good practices and reinforcing rights and local and Indigenous governance. So that includes governments, both at a national and local level. It includes producers, and we're using the term producer very specifically. So these are the people who are because we want to acknowledge that it's not just about private companies that are running industrial mine sites or big industrial agricultural sites, but sometimes also the small scale producers or those that have different structures to them. Civil society plays a really important role, and so do local community members. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Natasha, and she's going to talk about the resource exchange and how we are working to strengthen local and Indigenous governance.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. So indeed, so we launched the Resource Exchange to bring people together to strengthen and support people working in local governance. So as you can see, the Resource Exchange is really filling a key gap in the sector. And the network is made up of a large but niche group of people across the value chain. So our mission is to really connect people to the tools, the knowledge, the resources, and relationships they need to drive this local decisions about natural resource development. And we're proud to say that since launching in 2022, our team has hosted over 50 activities online and in person across the globe in Canada, Sierra Leone, South Africa, Tanzania, Zambia, and Guyana, and next month in Cote d'Ivoire as well. And it's so exciting that our network now we've had over 200 plus practitioners participate or contribute to the Resource Exchange since 2022. And members are based across 14 countries in North and South America and across Africa. And we're continuing to grow. Next slide, Carolyn. So over the past 4 years, the Resource Exchange participants had identified 7 different themes that underpin strong local governance. And so you see here, we have active, inclusive, traditional governance systems. So inclusive local Indigenous governance that shapes decision-making. It's very important. Community visioning and planning. It's where communities have a shared vision to help guide their short and long-term priorities. Landscape approach and cumulative impacts, looking at combined impacts across the region and sectors. Information for decision-making, how important it is to have trusted, accessible information that supports stronger decisions. Multi-stakeholder engagement and partnerships, which is important, collaboration across groups to improve alignment and outcomes in the sector. Benefit sharing, fair and transparent benefit sharing support communities. And leadership capacity, how important it is to have strong leadership that helps navigate complexity, conflict, and change. So what we've seen is that these 7 elements are applicable. Well, what's really important is that they're applicable across different regions and experiences, but to be effective, have to be context specific. And what we mean by that is context specific to the country, regions, or projects. And this framework really does guide our Resource Exchange activities. So what we've learned so much, I would say, and seen so many benefits since launching this network. And as you see, like, we realize that relationships do matter as much as frameworks. It's so important. Governance is deeply contextual. We know that communities need that time, resources, and that sort of space and that opportunity to build capacity in the sector. And so we've seen so many wonderful benefits. We have the whole list here, but one key takeaway is that this work cannot be done off the side of our desk. This is really important work. We need investment. We need to have people committed to this work, and we're glad that we're able to provide that space. And so, yeah, so these are key things as to why building such a global network with a focus on strengthening local governance has been so key and so important. So I will wrap it up. So if you want to learn more about the Resource Exchange and what we do, or feel free to reach out to us. Here's a fun QR code here. We're currently accepting new members to join the next cohort in June. So feel free to reach out if you have any questions. So thank you very, very much for your time, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Brilliant. Thank you
everyone.
so much, Natasha and Carolyn. That was absolutely fantastic. Round of applause, everybody,
Thank
for
you.
Natasha and Carolyn. Brilliant. Now we're going to leave your QR code up there on that screen for a second or two, just so that people can make sure they absolutely have it in their minds or perhaps in their phones, etc. A couple of quick questions. So, in terms of traditional governance, do you think that everybody who should know about traditional governance, even the existence of it, actually know about it? And I ask because the number of projects I've worked with, people go, I've got my permit. And you're like, great, that's just one form of governance. What do you think?
Yeah, so in a lot of the people that are participating in the resource exchange are navigating the sort of, I'll call them more old school centralized decision making, governance systems that include a permit, but then also there's a real shift to decentralization through more municipal or regional structures as well. And then there's also often a traditional or customary governance process that is there. And so I think to be direct in your question, it would absolutely, if you're working in any space, you should understand both the technical aspects of that traditional governance system, like how is that reflected in the Constitution? How is that reflected in permitting and rights, both subsurface and land rights? But then also just what is the sort of quote unquote health of that governance system? How inclusive is it? What are the mechanisms that are developed there? How representative of the community is that traditional governance mechanism or system being? And a lot of the people that we're working with are civil society organizations or chiefs and sub-chiefs themselves who are looking to I'll use the word like adapt those mechanisms to be more inclusive. So figuring out how to create subcommittees or councils so that women can have a more direct dialogue or sort of entry point, because women aren't often included at a sub chief or chief level. We're also seeing just some examples of where more organizing of women through different civil society organizations are then leading to more appointments or elections at a council or chiefdom level. So to answer your question again, it's definitely knowing about the governance is important, but then also trying to understand the health of it, and how reflective it truly is of the community is really important as well.
Awesome. So I think hold on to that thought, because if you can stick around, we're going to have a panel session in 20 minutes time. And because I'd love to bring Nigel into this discussion as well. But because you mentioned women, that is an amazing segue to the next speaker.
Fantastic.
Not just because we seem to be overloaded with women in this conference, which is that a problem? I don't think so. And it just goes to show that you can certainly have gender parity in terms of conferences that are talking about raw materials. That is not a problem at all, everybody, because we've been here, done it for many years now as well. So before we go into our next speaker, I'd just like to invite everybody to say a massive thank you to Natasha and Carolyn and everything that you're doing, because it is seriously exciting. And thank you very much. Round of applause.
Thank you.
Brilliant. So our next speaker,
maybe a quick comment. Just that
if
you mentioned.
Can just hold on to it, Nigel. Sorry, just 1 second, because we're really tight on time.
Okay.
So our next speaker that we've got coming to our stage, just while we sort out the spotlights, etc., is the fantastic Michelle Hon. And Michelle, unfortunately, couldn't be with us here today, but she did do a recording with myself a few days ago, and I'm going to hand straight over to Aileen to hit play. Aileen, over to you. Our next speaker is the one and only Michelle Hon. Michelle, welcome to our little fireside that we have here. Now, we're obviously pre-recording this, and we thought it was hilarious just now, looking for pictures of fires. And this picture here is quite special to me anyway, because I took this back in 2014 when I was hiking on Vancouver Island, and that means something to you as well, doesn't it?
It does. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here. But yes, I am coming to you from Vancouver Island, where we quite frequently have these beach fires ourselves. So yeah, it feels right at home.
Amazing. So what's your background? Who are you?
So I come to this conversation as a long time participant in the mining sector. Started out in finance, and when I thought I was completely tired of that, decided to get a master's in communications and get completely out and go do other things. At which point, when it came to thesis time, I realized just how much I knew about mining, and my contacts were all in mining, and I knew a lot about rocks. So I just sort of transformed what I was doing, which was mostly corporate communications at the time, into corporate social responsibility, is how it sort of started in its nascent years. Because of my communication skills, I was a natural fit for sustainability reporting, which is really where I started. And that was really the bread and butter of my work for a number of years. But as you probably know, when you're looking at companies to do their reporting metrics, you also find gaps, which you can then offer to help build up and fill for them. And so I became more of a specialist in the social and governance for sure. So on the S and the G side of ESG. Yeah, and then of course throughout moving around in the world, also crossed paths with yourself, and I'm a proud Satarla Global Associate as well.
Thank you. Awesome. So in terms of, you're based on Vancouver Island, but you mentioned that you've worked all over the world. What does that include?
So when you hail from the west coast of Canada, there are no lie thousands of junior exploration companies, and there used to be many more seniors in Vancouver as well, but with mergers and acquisitions there are fewer, but still some very large ones with their home base headquarters here, most of which have properties, exploration properties and operations in developing countries. So ironically, I have never actually done engagement like in communities in Canada. All of my engagement work, all of my human rights work, sustainability reporting, social performance is all in places Mexico, Honduras, Bolivia, a couple of African countries, Eritrea, Ghana, more recently working with places like Poland, some work in the US. So like very global in nature. But ironically, not too much in my own backyard.
Which is hilarious, because it means that my next question, which was all about how are things changing in British Columbia, I will put that one to one side. I'm only joking.
That's a whole other fireside chat.
That's a whole other fireside chat. So
Yeah.
in terms of how you see things are changing in that space of, be it whether we want to call it corporate social responsibility, ESG, sustainability, responsibility, resilience, etc. How do you see things changing at the moment?
I think over the years, I think we can be proud to be in the mining sector in the sense that very often mining companies were early adopters and strong performers, and really did pave the way for, doing a lot of things right, just in terms of standards, reporting standards, performance standards, but also voluntary best practice. So I think now, and there's always my sweet spot in terms of the companies I work with tend to be mid-tier and junior producers, right? So they're not necessarily at that stage yet where they can do Cadillac sort of programs, but they still very much a best efforts. I think in the last year and a half, we've seen a little bit of a swing back from the fervor of ESG tick boxes. But that said, I think the companies who were wanting to be responsible business citizens as they move through the world, they're still doing what they were doing before. So I think now we're seeing perhaps maybe a bit more of a subdued, approach. But still, steady go the responsible, the ones that are wanting to be responsible and have continuous improvement.
So in terms of what you've been up to more recently, you've created this thing called GEMS. Do you want to tell us about that?
I did. GEMS is an idea that was kind of one of those 10-year in the making overnight launches. I've, because of my engagement experience and really, I have a sense of genuine curiosity. For me, it's not just a job, right? I want to know not just the answers that the companies want to know or need to know. I always want to know a little bit more, right? I like going into the female focus groups in the workplace and really finding out what's going on. And
You nosy then.
that's one way to put it. I liked to call myself sort of the bartender, of the company where everybody wanted to talk to Michelle, but yeah, okay.
No, we'll go with bartender instead. That's much better.
No, it's true though. Like it is, a little bit, sort of beyond, kind of the sort of the questions that sometimes the company really wants to know. But yeah, so between that and, I've always been a communications person. I've always been a storyteller and a writer. And in my free time, there was a passion project I was working on that had to do with storytelling about moms. So completely unrelated to business. But while I was doing that particular project, and that ended up in more than one best-selling published anthology, I just realized how very interesting every single person is when you take the time to ask, and you take the time to ask the right questions. And I thought very early in the piece, I was still writing about my mom, and found out very early in the piece that I was just like, no, we need to talk about the women in mining in this type of storytelling way. So as opposed to, we have a lot of fantastic programs out there that are showcasing women in mining. We have the WIM 100 in Canada. We have the Ernst & Young, or maybe it's not even just Canadian, but the Ernst & Young video series. And they are still all generally high achievers or household names, and the other thing I thought for GEMS is I really wanted it to cover all women in all positions, because one of the things I don't think I understood when I got into the mining sector was, if I'm not an engineer or a geologist, what am I going to do? And there's so many different things you can do, right? So all of the positions, all of the stages of careers. Right now, we've got some early story writers who are PhD students, because sort of jumping forward, the idea behind this isn't just to write the stories, it's to put them into a digital archive for everyone to see. There's also going to be some cool technology where you can create your own bespoke anthologies, either digital or in print, so make your own collections of stories. But the other cool thing about it being digital is you can update your story as well, right? So if things change, if you get a different position for the PhD students, of course, things are going to evolve over time, right? You can update. Or also, it's like sometimes you might just be, more reflective, memory begets more memory, right? And questions, thought-provoking questions get more thoughts going. And maybe you just want to change your message. So essentially, GEMS Unearthed is, we launched that to just really start reaching out to women and getting these stories in more of a narrative arc kind of way. So it's not just, even the way we present ourselves in our profession tends to be a little bit male focused, right? It's a bit like achievement, accomplishment, how many dollars, how many deals, how many, it's very quantitative, and just really trying to get some of that qualitative in there. What's it like to be a woman, in the middle of these operations, in the middle of nowhere? What's it like to balance, family, career, and work, and like just really more of a person approach. So it's a bit of a longish answer to your question, but that's GEMS in
Yeah, no, it's great. And I think, like with that, so if we link GEMS Unearthed, which is amazing, by the way, and massive congratulations on what you've had the vision to create and what's happening with it now. It's brilliant. If we then tie that back into the theme of this year's conference, so creating certainty in a changing world, how do you see GEMS Unearthed or kind of complementing or fitting or shaping that?
Yeah, so part of when I did launch, part of the reason I created it was as a sustainability consultant, I was privy to a number of, corporate gender initiative targets in these reports, which, okay, we're going to do something for the women. It was generally vague, right? We're going to do something. And then, if I was with them for multiple reporting periods, that would be like, okay, well, we're at year end. We haven't really done anything. Let's roll that one over to the next year.
Yeah.
And so part of what I was thinking is, well, why don't I fill that gap a little bit? Why don't I try to find an answer to the what are we going to do? What could that gender initiative be? Because, because GEMS is it's not just about writing, but it's about reflecting. It's about increasing your communication skills, and it's about like really, especially with if in a workshop format in a company, like you're really feeling it's a sense of belonging, getting to know each other better. With the increase in this kind of communication, you can have increased psychological safety, even increased physical safety, right? Because if the better you communicate, the more you know each other, the more you're likely to do things like report hazards and things like that, right? I mean, at first it was just like, I had that in mind, right? I even have a slide in my deck where it's like, okay, if you want to tick some boxes for some of these reporting standards and show continual improvement and get that KPI ticked off, so a bonusable KPI. But then as I was considering the theme of this conference, also thought about, from responsibility to certainty, like where is there still some uncertainty? And I think there's been so much talk, and this isn't my full-time lane. The human resources I'm not an expert in it, but I have heard so many presentations, even as recently as PDAC about turnover or about attraction, retention, and turnover. And if you want to understand, I actually do have a stat here about this is a Canadian stat, but it's only approximately 17 to 19% of the Canadian mining workforce still today that's female, right? So it's a much smaller workforce pool, right? And so there's a structural thing there, right? So even a small amount of females, if they exit, there's some compounded retention risk there, right? So I just started thinking about, how do you get a bit more certainty? There's the business problem, the costs of, turnover and people leaving and having to retrain. There's safety and communication risks involved. There's workforce engagement risk if people aren't, talking to each other. And, how do you know? How do you know? You can have a number for turnover, but how do you know why the women are leaving? And like we were, discussing a bit earlier, if you're finding out why they're leaving on an exit interview, you've left it too late, right? So something like GEMS, and I'm not saying that this is like completely the answer to the problem, but to get more robust information as the women are there, as part of a larger exercise, this can sort of feed into, okay, taking the pulse of what's going on with women in the workforce and, validating some of these workforce experiences and capturing some of these insights that maybe wouldn't ever be captured. Maybe they're water cooler conversations, or maybe they just don't come up at all, right? But really accessing that information so that companies can be more certain about where the women in their workplaces heads are at, and maybe trying to do something about preventing their departure, changing things structurally so that they don't have to leave.
So is it about firstly listening, but also creating the space where actually different people feel more comfortable to talk and to share, because of course that space is different depending on who somebody is? And then as well, empowering people to do something about this with that information as well. So it's the listening in a slightly different way. And then because of that additional knowledge and information, we've now got a bit more of an idea as to what's really going on in the world. And not just then sitting on that information, it's then doing something with it. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely.
So Michelle, one of your superpowers is creating that space in which someone feels comfortable enough and trusts you enough to really open up and share their story, which can be a really personal thing. Do you want to give us any hints or tips or insight as to how do you do that?
Yeah, I think some of it is just experience, right? A long time of doing that in a number of different settings, whether it's with mining companies, at sites or in corporate office in engagement for specifically for engagement. But also on the personal side of things, I've taken expressive writing courses, and which specialize in facilitation of, so expressive writing, sort of the difference between expressive writing and just journaling, say, for example, is to get that emotion, out and into the work, and to integrate the emotion and to be thought-provoking in a different way. And also, I was a registered professional counselor for about 5 years. And so, just got some extra tools in the toolkit, I guess. But I've been told, I am a genuinely curious person. I've been told that that I'm approachable, and that, one of the things I do is very quickly achieve sort of that safe space in the room with the participants very early in the piece. And it can just produce some, surprising and sometimes almost magical, results in group.
So if we were going to do this now, so you were trying to put me at ease, I mean, we've got the fire, etc. How would you do it?
I think, so thanks for putting me on the spot.
Sorry.
I think when you're group setting, I mean, it kind of starts from the beginning. It starts from just eye contact. The fact that you're like, okay, let's do a fireside chat, already suggests that I'm someone that you can fireside chat with, right? So it's how you carry yourself, it's how you interact with people. But we also start in a group setting with warm-up exercises, right? So we don't just like throw you into the deep end. There's warm-up exercises to just get you familiar with each other in a very non-scary, non-private way, right? And just talking a little bit about, why you're here, why you're together, what your common purpose is together. And then the exercises, they do tend to go in an order that increases, sort of depth and breadth, and then you have voluntary sharing, in the group, and sharing begets more sharing, right? And having ground rules as well, right? About respect, about what happens in workshop stays in workshop, right? And just really forming that container in a way that people believe me. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, so believe you. That's a good one, because belief is almost one of those components that then builds up to trust, or it's all kind of wrapped up, isn't it? So where next? Where's GEMS going next?
Right now, there's a number of conversations with mining companies about running the GEMS workshop in-house for their female employees. And I'm also beta testing right now. There's a number of women out there who aren't necessarily, in a large company where they can participate in a group workshop together. Maybe they're independent consultants, or maybe they're small, teeny companies. There's just not critical mass for a workshop. So right now I'm just beta testing a methodology where we can use some of the writing exercises alongside an interview with myself. You get kind of the questions and answers all together, and I've designed a GEMS narrative story builder GPT. So the information, the interview transcript and the exercise content goes into the GPT, and your first story is produced for you, right? We're all busy people, and some people like writing more than others, and some people like writing about themselves more than others. And so, yeah, just having a 2,000-word story, sent to you with some title options just to get started. Of course, you can edit to your liking, but just something to make it a bit easier. The workshop process is designed for companies to deliver in-house, so they're blocking out time, you're doing it at work, you're given the time and the support to participate in the workshop experience. Whereas, some of our busy independent consultants or just can't take that kind of time. So this is like the maybe make it easy option.
Amazing. Well, with that, Michelle, thank you so much for joining us here in our beautiful fire on the beach somewhere on Vancouver Island. And thank you so much. And we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
So with that, I've worked out how to get cloning to work. You play a video of yourself. That was all a bit weird. But remotely, thank you very much, Michelle, for filming that with us. What we're going to do now is we're going to go straight into our panel session. And I know there's been lots of chatter behind the scenes about initiatives that are focused on women, but of course, there aren't just women in the workforce, kind of in terms of that inclusivity, welcoming diversity of thought, etc. as well. There are lots of conversations going on about that. However, I am going to go back because I very rudely told Nigel to be quiet before we played Michelle's video, and actually go back to the previous conversation that we were having with Carolyn and Natasha and Nigel, because you had a point that you wanted to make.
Well, the first point I wanted to make was you made a reference to a gender imbalance, and I'm looking at the screen right now and I'm not seeing it.
Thank you
Okay.
for bringing diversity to the table, sir.
That's okay. No, I'm trying to remember what it was I wanted to say when she was talking actually now. So we'll move on from that one. I was probably getting frustrated that she kept talking about the wonderful things they were doing, but unfortunately it seemed to be mainly focused on lithium in Cornwall and other processing. And
Oh, in terms
as
of
you might
Julia
have seen
Sutcliffe.
from a posting I once did, there's too much talk about lithium. I mean, lithium and more damn lithium is sort of comes to mind. And we need to move away from that because there's more to critical minerals and rare earths than bloody lithium. Excuse my
Well,
language.
there are indeed, and but I think that this is something here where kind of reflecting on why do members of the UK government always talk about Cornwall? Well, in part, yeah, there are some nice rocks in Cornwall. There are also some nice rocks in the northeast of Scotland, where I'm from, for example, in Yorkshire, all kinds of places. But the difference is that the politicians in Cornwall are very, very, very good at pushing all of that forwards. And so I think that's one of the reasons why we do hear quite a lot about it. And also obviously Julia was referring to Camborne School of Mines a lot, which is a very good institution. But there are other universities in the UK as well who also do really good research. But it's really interesting. It's great in terms of publicizing Camborne, etc. But it's amazing the reaction it gets from everybody else. Because everyone's like, why aren't you talking about me? But I think what that does is it says, well, then do something to get them to talk about you. And it might not necessarily be carry on doing amazing research. I mean, obviously keep doing that. But sometimes it's about get the right person to talk about you at the right time. I don't know, Nigel, what you think about
Yeah,
that.
I'm going to pull in actually Carolyn and Natasha because one of the things in a second, only because we seemed in the UK to talk about things a lot. The number of times I'm finding out, and I'm sorry, Sarah, and if Jeff's on this, I'm sorry, Jeff. The number of times I find out that people are meeting with government, attending some committee meeting, they're doing this, that, and the other, and they talk about dialogue and consulting. And if they spent a bit more time actually doing something rather than having dialogue and consulting, we get a long way. Now, I had the pleasure, it's please like me and Carolyn and Tasha in this, I had the pleasure of listening to the Minister of Mines from Ontario at a conference just at the back end of last year. And he was possibly the most impressive speaker, other than quickly mentioning Sarah, at the entire conference. And they seem to be trying in Ontario to get. I have an affinity to Canada. I spent 15 years of my life in Canada. I love the country from Toronto all the way across to, but from Nova Scotia all the way across to Vancouver. So I have a lot of time for Canada. And he was really impressive. And Canada seems to be getting their act together, not only in terms of developing the strategies to actually get digging and also processing, also engaging, because we were talking about this earlier, engaging with the Indigenous communities a little bit more so probably in BC than in Ontario at the present time, but BC probably has more of an issue, but not an issue, more of a requirement to, I should say. So I just feel that internationally, the UK is lagging and behind everybody. And I listen to people from within government, and it never gives me really encouragement that we're going to do anything other than talk about things.
We're very good at talking, Nigel.
Oh
Very good
man.
at talking. Oh yes. Carolyn, Natasha, thoughts?
I wouldn't say that people in the UK are the only people that are really good at talking. I think especially when it comes to, good social performance and good community relations, like we love to talk about that stuff. And we need to because there's so much that we haven't really decided or firmed up about what good looks like. And I'm so tired of dialogue for dialogue's sake. That being said, there are so many people that get excluded from discussions and dialogue. So I think what we're really excited about is about through the resource exchange is just learning about what people are actually doing to prepare to react sometimes to different mining and other natural resource things that are happening in their communities. In this experience, we see internationally that so many people look to Canada, and Canada has, there's a lot happening because of the Indigenous rights structures in the country and because of requirements, because of our process of reconciliation and sort of where we are as a society and understanding our history and our colonial history. And because Indigenous nations here are just like, they're doing a ton of stuff and they're putting so much together. And so there's a lot to like share and sort of physically put out there that showcases what good Indigenous governance looks like. That being said, what we see is internationally, people are like, oh, we want an IBA, an impact benefit agreement. We want this. And so we need to be a bit careful. There's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of learnings about what doesn't work in Canada as well. When you tell people in Canada that we're globally like held up as a good example, they're like horrified. So, so
just shows how bad it is elsewhere.
Yeah.
So with that, I don't know, Pippa, maybe if we come across to yourself and let's dive into the world of concrete. And I know we're not just talking about any old concrete, we're talking about very specific aspects of clinker, etc. in there. In terms of who leads the world in this area of research, but then from an industrial perspective, actually making those changes, where would you say the most action and change is happening?
Yeah, I definitely think so it's kind of complex in cement and concrete because the supply chain is kind of not decoupled, but you have the cement producers who are producing these reactive materials, and they're different to the concrete producers who are mixing it with water and kind of taking it to the construction site. And I mean, we didn't get into it, but you can the same cement can have different performance when you mix it up, depending on what else you put in it, what grade of aggregates you use, what the kind of concrete mix design is. So I think there's a lot of kind of power at the application level, and I think it's really industry led in terms of how people are using the materials rather than just on the production side. But I definitely think a lot of the actions at the kind of industry and construction level.
Yeah.
More so than even what cement producers. It's not like, it's more of a tail that wags the dog kind of industry.
Yeah, so it's interesting, isn't it? Like what's needed sometimes to push that change through. And I mean, I guess, Nigel, coming back to yourself, like when you're running the financial models, I assume that if you were running those 5 different options, I guess you had through your models 20 years ago, the criteria that you would have been using, would it have been different?
Oh God, yes. We wouldn't have paid attention to half the things we do these days. Actually, I want to pick up on something that you, Sarah, mentioned with Pippa. Is about one of the things you also face, I think, when developing new construction methods, be it wood, etc., or changing the concrete, is actually financing it. Because if you build something which is using a non-traditional construction or some form of new untested construction, financing it becomes more difficult. So for instance, if you buy a wood-framed house, you will find that some lenders will not provide finance for wood-framed houses. Some insurance companies won't provide insurance for wood-framed. So when you're developing new construction techniques, one always has to bear in mind, is that technique going to satisfy the people that finance the developments as well as meet the requirements of the developer themselves? And you've got to be very careful there, because great ideas sometimes fall apart because they're not adopted for reasons completely outside of what you might have thought of. Insurability and financeability.
Yeah, and one of the papers that we wrote back in 2018 was all about the insurance sector in the world of mining. And take the world of tailings dams, for example. We know how to do them better, and we're not doing it because we cannot get the NPV calculations to stack up, and also because whilst they are actually lower risk because it's newer technology, the insurers find it very difficult to get their equations to work. Another lever, of course, is around the governance, the policy, that side of things. Because if you say, nope, you absolutely can't have downstream tailings dams or something, fine. Then everybody goes, okay, you've now drawn that red line in the sand. So there's an element there of a sort of risk appetite and tolerance. And maybe, Michelle, if I bring you in on that, because I know that you love a little bit of risk management conversation, in terms of working out kind of where do you actually want change to happen and where do you not want change to happen? When you were talking about bringing on board new suppliers, of course, there are some things where you say, right, it's really important for certain practices to be adhered to, whereas actually in other areas, we do want change. We want you to bring on board new methodologies, etc. But how do you get that to work inside a procurement system?
Sure, you always ask such great questions, Sarah.
Sorry.
I think the big thing is to be open and be open for what is out there, open for the possibilities, understand what you want, and what you need to do your homework. And look at the different possibilities, and then also open yourself. I mean, we're having the discussion also around Indigenous suppliers. Are there opportunities to partner with your local Indigenous suppliers and work together and create something, a small business or business opportunity? And we've spoken a bit about the Canadian example, and Carolyn and Natasha, I'm down the road in Toronto as well, where I'm now living. So being very exposed to the Canadian Indigenous system, which is held up highly. I think what is important as well is, and I'm sorry, Daneo is not part of the discussion, so I have to punt her as well, is to have a look at the South African example. Because in the South African example, you've got, while there's great work done, Nigel has highlighted Australia as well, and Canada with Indigenous folk, what we have in the South African context is a majority that is getting the benefits of the work that is being put in. So it's a lot more visible in terms of what works and what doesn't work. If you try something and it doesn't work in a small community, one could easily overlook it. But something in the South African community, which is impacting significant communities and significant numbers of people, is definitely a model that one can go and look at and learn from, because there's a lot of tremendous work that's been done in terms of supplier development, creating businesses that can provide really good services to mining companies and minerals companies, and that can grow and develop, and we help to achieve new benchmarks, and we invest in them, and we get the benefits of generational benefits. So I think these are models to definitely go and explore on that side.
No, I agree with you, Michelle. And I think that this is also something where often there are parts of the world that we don't go to for really good practice or to learn from, because they just don't tell everyone about it. And that includes the likes of South Africa. It includes most of Latin America, to be honest. I think some of the most responsible practice in the world has been developed and is used in different countries within South America. But often people don't go there, and maybe it's because of the language difference or something like that. Carolyn, you want to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of underscore what you both were saying, is that there's so much to learn from other parts of the world. And I think one of the things that we found really interesting in the resource exchange is how much people from Canada are learning from South Africa, very specifically, from Sierra Leone, from Guyana, from places that you wouldn't normally see as low risk, but where there are people who are working hard to, create a stronger governance system, which creates more stability and lowers risk. And yeah, it's just really fascinating, especially when you can understand that context is so specific, but really use a mindset of trying to see the commonalities, then there's just so much we can learn from each other for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I come jump in there? Because you mentioned Sierra Leone. I was looking at a project there just recently, actually, and you mentioned in your earlier comments about local governance and chiefs and sub-chiefs. The issue I found there was on deeper analysis of the financial sort of projections. Buried in it was a consulting fee, which upon further examination was being paid to the chief.
Mm-hmm.
Who had granted the necessary approvals for them to do what they were going to do. And it was very clearly for his own personal benefit. And we had difficulty with it. And be honest, I've not gone forward with it because it had all the trappings of basically a bribe. And we weren't interested in having any kind of potential risk and taking that to investors who would question our reputation if they also determined that it constituted a bribe. So there are still areas, unfortunately, where those practices, I mean,
absolutely.
Sarah's comments earlier about where I used to do things years ago. Many years ago, I was involved in a project when I was working for a bank in London, in Nigeria, and the amount of bribery that went on during that project was astronomical. That's all I'm going to say on the subject. I wasn't party to it, and in fact, I got into trouble because I wasn't going to be party to it. But it was
Nigel,
it was right down to cars being gifted to bankers and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It was horrendous.
Yeah, no, and I think, I don't know that specific example, but I do know that there are many people in Sierra Leone who are working specifically on transparency in the chiefdom, right? Transparency of revenue. Like, what does that look like for a community to actually understand what revenue streams are coming into the community versus the leadership, and what is the responsibility of companies and government agencies in supporting that. So no, and I think, one of the things that, I mean, we when we think about any of the stakeholders who are trying to companies, governments who are trying to perform well, like everyone has a long way to go. But I think when it comes to local governance, I would definitely encourage people to seek out those who are looking to build stronger and more responsible local governance. But yeah, thanks for sharing that experience.
So building on that, we've got a whole range of people sharing their thoughts over the next 2 days, and some of them will be talking about transparency, especially in places like West Africa. So, for example, tomorrow afternoon, we've got Melody McNeil from PAX. And so this is a group of people who used to work for USAID, shall we say, coming and sharing some of their thoughts and perspectives with us. And there are a number of others who will be leaning in on that topic as well. We've also got the likes of engineers such as Grace Youngworth from WSP, who'll be coming and speaking to us. We've got Rini Astuti, who is a social scientist who's based in Australia, and she's going to be giving us some of the insight to her research. We've got Priscilla, who is truly beautiful and wonderful, who basically just rips apart the title of the conference and says it shouldn't be called that. And actually, I think based on this afternoon's discussion, is certainty what we're aiming at? Or actually, can we use this to be one of the catalysts, or not necessarily the catalyst, but something to really nudge that change forward? So as you were saying, Nigel, there are lots of things that are holding us back. What can actually help us get kind of change which side of that seesaw we're on at the moment. We've got Jan Henk, who's going to give us an insight into that world of risk management, and then Fiona Clowder, who used to be in various senior roles in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office within the UK in South America. So we'll get more insight there. So with all of that, I want to say a massive thank you to all of our fantastic speakers here this afternoon in session 3. I've learned a huge amount, and I can feel my brain really trying to process some of this of like, what are the differences or the similarities between the kind of government-driven governance in a country and the traditional governance? And what does that mean in terms of planning or running a project? And also, when we're talking about a project, are we doing it because we just want to dig copper out the ground? Or actually, is it much bigger than that? Is it a case of the fact that the natural resources are there can act as a catalyst for something much more exciting in the longer term? And I think lot of what we've been hearing this afternoon is actually it's the bigger picture that we're thinking about. But sometimes in terms of be it putting together the financing or whatever, everything needs a bit of a nudge or a bit of a kick in the right direction to get people to realize this is the more sensible option. And it's actually lower risk in the long term. You are more certain of getting your financial return if you do this properly. And this goes all the way through, not just in terms of that big macro scale, but also when we go into very specific areas such as transferring contracts across to new suppliers, exactly as Michelle let us have an insight into earlier on today with your very practical 11 steps. So thank you very much for that. I shall be swiping it. And then insight into the world of concrete. I mean, who knew? And thank you, Pippa, for your glorious graphs that are there with a huge amount of data in them. But I think this is also a case of we often know what is the direction we need to go in, but what are the conditions that we need other people to often create to allow us to get there, be it governments, be it financiers, be it insurers, be it whoever it might be, what allows us to actually get something from just being a talk shop, as Nigel was alluding to true action and to true change. So with that, thank you so much to our wonderful panel today. We will be back again bright and early tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. So all of you Australians and Southeast Asians and everybody else who are there watching this recording online while we're fast asleep, we'll see you very shortly. Yeah, look forward to the next session, because who knows, we might be able to come up with some answers and create some action rather than just talking, Nigel. That's what we're aiming at. Brilliant. So with that, thank you very much, everyone, and see you all soon.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Guys, thank
Cool.
you.
Thank you, everyone. That was fantastic.
Thank you.